The year is 1997. I am 8 years old, and my friend Remy is telling me about this game her brother Jason just got, in which you control not a single character, but a whole army of them. I remember telling her it was impossible. I mean, how would the controls even work? The camera? She's insistent, so we sit down at the family computer and fire up a little game called Command & Conquer. Released in 1995 by Westwood Studios, it was not the first real-time strategy game, but it was the first that I ever played. Though RTSs would go on to become one of my all-time favorite genres, the original Command & Conquer never clicked with me. It was all just so 90s techno-grunge. Red Alert 2 and Generals are personal favorites, and I absolutely must do a video on Renegade someday. But the original never got my Tiberium harvesting, so to speak. Back in those days, I was looking for something closer to my fantasy-driven heart. Flipping through the hollowed pages of GamePro, I got my wish. A new game was in development that would go on to be one of the most popular video games ever made, with an all-timer of a soundtrack I still listen to. It was, of course, this game. Age of Empires 2 is known far and wide, from lo-fi remixes on YouTube to ancient internet memes. A game that has been re-released, remastered, spawned a competitive community that remains healthy today, and an entire YouTube channel dedicated to the math of its fictional soldiers. But where did it come from and where did it go? Gone only to re-emerge from the shadows when we needed it most. How did this game and this series evolve, diverge, die, and eventually be reborn as a franchise that is still going strong today when the rest of its genre and competitors died out years ago? What is the Age of Empires? These videos take hundreds of hours to make, from research to writing, gameplay capture, and editing, and outside of the Sims video, don't do particularly well. If you want to support the channel, the easiest thing you can do is ye old like, comment, and subscribe, or watch some of my other videos so the algorithm stops strangling me into a slow death of suffocating irrelevance. If you want to go above and beyond, consider leaving a tip through Super Thanks, checking out my books over on Amazon, or my games on itch.io and DriveThruRPG. I make these videos to promote my work, so there's not much use in doing it if I don't actually sell any copies. Alright, that's enough of the ad. Let's talk about Age of Empires. But first, a bit of context. War games go back to antiquity. Chaturanga, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, dates to the 7th century. But it and its successor, chess, are less war games and more war-themed games, in the same way that Ticket to Ride and Carcassonne have nothing to do with building trains or civic planning. It's just the coat of paint we put over the game to make it more interesting. Art assets over an existing skeletal structure. Games of army men, of setting up miniatures on a table to flick little pebbles or rocks at, goes back to at least the 1800s and lives on in the sandboxes of today. But this too is a falsehood. These are games of dexterity masquerading as games of war. We might as well go bowling, paint little faces on the pins, and call it artillery. The conventional wisdom is that wargaming starts with the Prussians' Kriegspiel in 1824, continuing up through H.G. Wells' Little Wars in 1913. George over at Super Bunny Hop just did an excellent video on that history on his channel. I'll link to it below. But what we think of as modern wargaming really comes into existence after World War II, exploding in the 1960s thanks to companies like Avalon Hill. It was a community so lucrative and so robust, it eventually birthed an entirely new medium in Dungeons and Dragons, with Gygax and Arneson asking themselves what it would be like to play a single unit rather than a whole army. And while that history is fascinating, John Peterson does a great job recounting it in his book Playing at the World, which is well worth your time and George also used in his video. It's worth remembering that this wasn't the only revolution taking place, of war games turning into role-playing games. Far from Lake Geneva, another revolution was quietly taking place, one that had been going on for far longer, a continent away, in a little place called California. A digital revolution. 1962's Space War is widely considered to be one of the first video games ever made, if not the first, and has war right in the name. But it's more about aerial dogfighting than actual strategy. No, the real revolution comes from the United States Navy, which had been wargaming on tables and charts since 1867 and went electronic at the very dawn of computers. In June of 1945, the Naval War College began work on what would be called NEWS, or the Navy Electronic Warfare Simulator. Constructed at the Naval Electronics Laboratory in San Diego, California, it was completed in 1957 and cost over $7 million. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $80 million today. I first learned about NEWS in this book by Frances J. McHugh, which my mom got me through her work like 15 years ago. I have no idea if you can actually buy this thing, but I'll try to find a link to it. NEWS enabled two sides to play on a single map at 1, 2, or 4 times real speed, making it the first electronic real-time strategy game ever made. And this was in the 50s, and I wouldn't have heard about it if it weren't for this little book. So thanks, Francis. This book was written in the 60s, by the way, so he's probably dead by now, but you know, maybe not. Video games would of course continue to evolve, but it's not until the late 80s and early 90s that we start seeing prototypes of what would become the real-time strategy genre. We get things like Legionnaire, North and South, and the most accredited of the bunch, Herzog Zwei. If you've never played it, Herzog is a very weird, very cool little game in which your Robotech ferries around troops to little bases. The troops are capable of attacking and conquering on their own, freeing the player up to focus on building and positioning units. Taking over bases turns them into fuel depots for your little mech, expanding what territory you can influence. And if you're interested in more of that history, you should check out George's video. He covers a lot of those early games, so thankfully I don't have to. All of those games look like RTSs if you squint hard enough or just with the benefit of hindsight. But there is one game and one game alone that is credited with birthing this genre I love so much. And shockingly, it's a game I haven't actually played until now. Let's talk about Dune 2. The sequel to a point-and-click adventure game with a worker placement system, Dune 2 was created in 1992 by Westwood Studios. You know, the Command and Conquer people. Producer Brett Perry is even recognized as the person who coined the term real-time strategy as part of the game's marketing. And yeah, this looks like a Westwood RTS if I've ever seen one. Buildings need power. Constructing one type of building unlocks the ability to make other types of buildings. Harvesters seek out spice to bring back to your base, and little pixel dudes try to kill you, cause this is adapting Dune, and that's how Dune works. It's slower, for sure. You're only able to move one unit at a time. Bases require you to put down concrete slabs for some reason, and units take their sweet time killing one another. It's like the polar opposite of cannon fodder in nearly every way. Dune 2 reminds me a lot of the original SimCity compared to its later incarnations. Primitive, sure, but recognizable. I mean, let's be honest, if you grabbed a random RTS fan and told them this was the first Command & Conquer, they'd have no reason to doubt you. The game's got a neat provincial campaign in which you try to take over Arrakis, and overall just seems really cool. I'll have to play more of it if I ever get around to doing a C&C retrospective. But hey, you don't have to take my word for it. You can still play it thanks to DOSBox and whatever Westwood employee put it up on the Internet Archive. Isn't video game preservation awesome? So if Dune 2, the first truly realized RTS, looks and plays exactly like Command & Conquer, how do we get from that to Age of Empires? The very next RTS would bring knights to the table with 1994's Warcraft. Speaking in an IGN interview in 2009, Shane DeBerry stated Blizzard was directly inspired by games like Dune 2 and Herzog's Way. While continuing their lineage, Warcraft took a stronger leaning towards story, with pixelated cutscenes and a tale of paladins against orcs. The economy is more nuanced than Dune's, with the player having to gather both gold and lumber instead of spice. There's a population cap which can be increased through the building of farms, and peasants can construct buildings, harvest wood, or work in the mines, all while knights defend them from raids or attack the enemy, with a charming aesthetic and a soundtrack that distinctly reminds me of A Link to the Past for some reason. Tactics are more concerned with picket lines and scattered defenses than giant armies being hurled at one another. It firmly pegs itself on one end of an implied spectrum. Warcraft with individuals, Command & Conquer with groups, and Age of Empires with entire armies. A warning to Age of Empire fans who want to give Warcraft a try: if you play it like Empires, you will immediately jackknife your economy by building too many villagers and running out of gold. Learned that one the hard way. Unlike Dune 2, Warcraft has a linear campaign, with each mission introducing new mechanics as to not overwhelm the player in what would become a staple of the genre. But it shows that even at the very earliest days of RTSs, people were exploring out in different directions, seeing what they could make of this new type of game. 1995 returns us to Command & Conquer, with Westwood beginning development soon after completion of Dune 2 in parallel to Warcraft's development. It features full motion video with construction happening through a central build menu. The game is far faster, getting rid of the concrete building pads and adding a narrator that clarifies the action backed up by unit barks so the player can keep track of the quicker pace of things. Gameplay is focused on building, exploring, and controlling territory, or to put that another way, to command and conquer. All construction efforts, be they buildings or units, draw from a singular resource pooled simultaneously, meaning that you can build quickly, but also choke your economy down to a crawl when getting impatient. Like Dune 2, resources are scattered in fields around the map and collected by harvesters, taking the form of Tiberium, a sort of sci-fi spin on uranium, likely to avoid a lawsuit from the Herbert estate. Maps are designed with choke points and flanks in mind, and unit composition of a squad is paramount, with units filling the classic rock, paper, scissors roles strategy games have been using since the Kriegspiel days. These two games, Command & Conquer and Warcraft, would become titans of their industry, continually launching alternating games in their respective series, forever seeking to up their competition. But in the quiet days of 1995, a new game was taking shape. A game not of peasants or of squads, but of empires. Ensemble Studios released Age of Empires in 1997. It was their first game in what would end up being the only series they ever made, aside from Halo Wars. Which begs the question, who is Ensemble Studios? I always assumed they were Microsoft's in-house RTS team, but the real story is far more interesting. Enter one Tony Goodman. Back in '89, the year I was born, Tony founds the Ensemble Corporation in Dallas, Texas, alongside John Boog Scott, a friend from high school. They do IT consulting and are primarily known for a software called Command Center, which looks to be some sort of dashboarding software. Like all tech companies, it would grow, get acquired in '98, and leave our story forever. The path we're interested in diverges in 1995, where, by all accounts, Tony Goodman just up and decides he wants to make a video game. And I mean, hey, we've all been there. Hopefully I'll get to release a video game someday. So back in 95, Tony, his good pal John, and his brother, Rick Goodman, remember him for later, used the capital earned from the Ensemble Corporation to form Ensemble Studios. And if you've seen my Hitman retrospective, this is nothing new. It's just what tech companies did in the 90s, expanding into video games as just another product SKU. No, the real trick here is a guy named Bruce Shelley. Bruce Shelley is basically the Stan Lee of this story. Sandy Peterson might actually be the Stan Lee of this story, but we're not there yet. So maybe Bruce is like the Jack Kirby. Point being, dude is ridiculously well credentialed. An economics graduate from the University of Virginia, a school I'm eternally fond of, Bruce gets his start in gaming at a company called Iron Crown, working on an official, unofficial, it's complicated Lord of the Rings role-playing game. This is role-playing in the D&D sense, not the Final Fantasy sense. He then goes on to Avalon Hill, working on war games, again in the board sense, before co-creating a little game called Civilization with a dude named Sid Meier, another retrospective I'll have to tackle someday. Like I said, dude's got an impressive rap sheet. As recounted in this excellent interview with the Idle Thumbs podcast, Bruce is living in Chicago writing strategy guides when he gets a call from one Tony Goodman, sometime in 94 or 95. Tony and Bruce had previously met at wargaming conventions, exchanged cards, but not really kept in touch, having not spoken in nearly 15 years. According to Bruce, Tony calls him to basically ask, hey, what does it actually take to start a video game company? Remember, Tony is a tech guy, not a video game guy. They talk for a bit, Bruce gives him what advice he can, and that's that. Time goes by, Tony forms Ensemble Studios, and then reaches out to Bruce to offer him a job. Bruce can't leave Chicago due to family reasons, so in February of 96, they reach an agreement in which Bruce Shelley will drive down to Texas once or twice a month and help the team at Ensemble with the game's core design. And while I don't want to overly stress one person's contributions, games are made by entire teams, after all. This is probably the one decision that makes this company. Well, that and Blizzard, but we're getting to that. Be patient. So we have a company founded by friends who have never made a game before, and an old school veteran driving long distance to help them make said game, and none of them really have any idea of what the game is going to be. According to Bruce Shelley, again in the Idle Thumbs podcast, their early ideas centered on a survival game in which you crashed on an island and had to get off. Tony Goodman talks in interviews about a love of puzzles from his youth, and you can easily see them pivoting to a game like Myst, which released in 1993 and went on to gargantuan success. A puzzle game in which you're stranded on an island and have to manage resources to get off while solving puzzles like Survival Kids or The Witness. Then one day, Timothy Dean, a programmer judging by the game's credits, walks in holding a new game and proudly proclaims, "We gotta make one of these." And that game was Warcraft, or possibly Warcraft 2, accounts vary. The idea quickly shifts to make something like Warcraft or Command and Conquer, but with a historical aim, leveraging Bruce's experience on Civilization and Tony and Bruce's shared love of wargaming. From Avalon Hill to Age of Empires. Built in 2.5 years by a team of only 25, the game was comprised of just 13,000 lines of code written entirely in assembly, similar to Roller Coaster Tycoon. Ahoy just did a great video on that game's history. If you want to know more, I'll link to it below. The technical information of this game's creation is preserved in these excellent articles by Matt Pritchard for PC Gamer. They have a ton of awesome information, including confirming the Timothy Dean story, that the original title was Dawn of Man, and that Mark Toronto, another programmer, came up with the Wonder mechanic in 1997. They're well worth checking out if you're interested. Again, links below. Historical preservation is important. Over the course of its development, the game's scope narrowed, focusing solely on ancient civilizations, with the company securing a publishing deal from Microsoft. And it was Microsoft that finally gave the project its title, with little coverage and virtually no previews, Age of Empires would release in October of 1997. The first Age of Empires begins, like most things, in Egypt. This campaign serves as the tutorial, teaching us the game's mechanics and discrete missions, like Warcraft. We open with a pre-rendered cutscene emphasizing armies over units, of history and the passage of time, and then it's right into the first mission. Each mission begins with a detailed briefing, giving us an outline, a bit of history for edutainment value, and some general advice on how to go about each map. Take special notice of the language used here, clearly reminiscent of board games, no surprise given the developer's history. Even though this is a tutorial, it thankfully skips over tedious things like mouse control and gets right into the importance of hunting, gathering, building, and boning. Age of Empires may be the title, but this is really a game of management, of decisions and resources. We go from Dune's spice to Warcraft's gold and lumber to Age of Empires' 4 resources: food, wood, gold, and stone, and exponential economic escalation. Villagers are the vast cog in this resource-driven machine, responsible for gathering all resources and building all buildings. And much like real life, they cost food to make. But food is not as simple as it seems. Villagers can gather from berries, which are stationary and free, but quickly exhaust. They can gather from elk, which are less stationary, but no less free, and which decay over time, meaning they must be harvested immediately if we're going to maximize the return on our murderous stock. But the goal is clear. Gather food, make people, more people gather more food, which helps us make more people. And then there's wood. Age of Empires has a population cap which you quickly hit unless you build houses, which cost wood. Or we could use that wood to build farms, which exhaust like other food sources, but provide a steady gathering rate that's easy to defend. And there's boats, which take wood to build and can gather plentiful fish. That may not seem like a good move on land, but can make or break a sea map. So clearly, we need some kind of a ratio between wood and food. But there's also supply depots to consider. These drop-offs take wood to build, but drastically reduce the distance villagers have to travel. Less distance means faster gathering, which means more resources. This is no different from a lot of city-building games, and is, in effect, a puzzle. No doubt close to Tony Goodman's heart. I mean, this is functionally a worker placement game, just played in real time instead of on a board. The real pressure comes not from within, but from without, as Age of Empires is competitive, playing against either the computer or another player. We may decide to slow down on food and gather wood instead, constructing our little buildings, while our opponent focuses on food, building more villagers and growing their economy. We may decide to forgo supply depots, not thinking them worth the investment, but our opponent making the opposite choice will get an incremental advantage over the length of the match, tipping the balance in their favor. We can see how the designers force this decision-making by looking at just 2 buildings, the granary and the storage pit. Granaries are the food drop-off for all sources except meat, with storage pits being the drop-off for everything else. So where do you spend your wood? On the granary that is going to rapidly speed up food production, or the storage pits, speeding up wood and gold? An easy decision if you're good at hunting. This question of resources extends into military units and combat. Barracks can only produce 1 unit at a time, no queuing. In the early game, the wood to make a second barracks is a big investment, but one which doubles the output potential of our military-industrial complex, and in the late game is absolutely necessary to keep up with the output of your rival. All these decisions layer on top of one another to construct a system in which one player is going to outpace the other, eventually winning the match. A player who builds a steady economic engine but ignores their military spending will get overrun or weakened by raids. A player who focuses only on the military will soon find themselves drowning in enemy reinforcements, funded by a a much stronger economy. A balance between the two approaches is necessary, formed from tiny, almost meaningless decisions of buildings, villagers, and resource allocation. Each decision puts their finger on the scales of fate, tipping the match towards one player and against their opponent, eventually getting them off balance to topple their empire. Less a joust and more like sumo, arsenals of monarchy fighting as much with coin as with blade. The final pillar of gameplay bridging the gap between economics and warfare is technology. The game has a host of upgrades which improve your soldiers' attack or defense, the gathering rate of your villagers, or provide access to new buildings and units. This further distinguishes players, further tips the balance over the course of a match. These technologies, while vital, not only require resources to research, but are locked behind the advancement of ages, themselves quite costly. If a player stockpiles a significant number of resources, typically food, and constructs all of the prerequisite buildings, they can age up their empire. When a player is close, they typically align all their efforts towards that goal, struggling to afford a new age as they juggle the needs of more villagers and more soldiers, all while their opponent rushes to do the same. Once purchased, a bar steadily ticks up as the age is researched. This crucially lets a player breathe, easing down the tension, allowing them to focus on strengthening their economy or rebuilding their military, without the pressure of advancing in technology. The bar fills, the age advances, and the player is flooded with new buildings to build, new techs to research, and new units to field, starting the cycle over again. These are overlapping gameplay loops like we discussed in the Sims video. The short-term gameplay loop is one of raw economics, of a limited number of villagers who need to gather different types of resources, all with their own benefits and drawbacks, requiring subtle, small decisions to be made. Then we have the medium loop of technologies and aging up. This requires all those resources gathered in the short-term loop of a player rushing to build each building, rebuild their armies, and research all of the available technologies before dashing to the next age. The bar ticks up, the player gets a breather, and then starts again. And finally, we have the long-term loop of the match itself, of building up troops for both defense and offense, probing our enemy to find gaps in their defenses or send their economy tumbling. Building those troops and defending against attacks requires steady economic input, with technologies separating our armies from our opponents, providing a crucial edge in the heat of battle. Or in other words, the short-term loop is economic, the medium technological, and the long-term military. This is the opposite of games like Civilization, in which the military combat is the short-term loop, the economics the medium, and the technology the long-term over the course of a match. As for the Egypt campaign itself, the first third of its missions are simplistic matches that serve as a disguised tutorial. No problems there. Egypt 6 is where things get bumpy, because while it's an ordinary mission in which we have to farm a bunch of food, control a ruin, and dodge raids, it highlights the biggest complaint of the original Age of Empires. It's AI. Though I think that's honestly a misnomer, because the real problem here is the pathfinding. And look, I'm no pathfinding expert, but I've messed with my fair share of A-star algorithms and know a bit about how these things work under the hood. It's basically a grid and some math. You number all the spots and then do some addition and subtraction to work out the shortest path. And in the strictest meaning, it works in Age of Empires. A unit has a position and you can tell it where to go and it will go there. But boy is it buggy, due to the game's sprites and collision detection. Units in this game are too shy to walk through another, otherwise they would all stack unnaturally, so we need some distance between them. But the units are so shy, they seem to want 2 times the clearance necessary to walk past something, given the angle. And they won't walk over things like farms at all, instead going around them like they would any other building. The end result are units that continually get bogged down in narrow passageways, get stuck on rocks, or generally take the long way around because they're too polite to scooch around their neighbor. It is such an omnipresent problem that it dictates how a player actually plays, having to place their farms and buildings well apart from one another, directly impacting their economy and making their base harder to protect. While the problem is, navigable, it's a constant drain on the player's attention and causes mounting frustration over the course of a match. It helps explain why the game wouldn't be the huge breakout success of its sequel. The 7th mission is a train wreck for an entirely different reason, with the designer's intentions being dashed on the dual rocks of systems and technical limitations. The idea behind the mission is pretty cool. Our goal is to stockpile 1,000 stone and 1,000 gold as part of our continued tutorial. We start bottled up on a beach and have 2 enemies, the seaborne Minoans and the land-based Libyans, positioned on either side of us in a classic pincer attack. The intended play is obvious. Build up our defenses, hold back the raids, climb to our economic target, but the janky pathfinding forces us to spread out on the limited beach. The Minoan boats start with sea superiority and can hit us easily from the water, exposing anything on the coast to attack. The diplomacy system is completely broken and of no use, and even stranger, in order to get gold, we have to trade with the enemy docks, who will of course attack us. It ends up just being a confusing mess of a thing. In some ways, what's worse is that the scenario is kind of a lie. Holding out against the enemy raids and counterattacking the Libyans shows their bark is worse than their bite, with the land threat evaporating after a few easy attacks. The Minoans similarly collapse once their navy is pushed aside. Once you push them aside and set up a colony to mine stone, you might as well put in the laundry while the game plays itself. The match goes from frustrating to the point of keyboard smashing to yawn-inducing in a matter of moments, with maximum tension replaced by boring tedium. There was a cool scenario in the mind of the designer, but the actual implementation fails to capture any of that intent. Egypt 8 is meant to be a tutorial on priest, but ends up being a puzzle we have to solve, given that if the priest dies, we lose. Egypt 9 wants us to treat it like a real match, building a town upon a center island, but there's no enemy on this map, just an island filled with lions and alligators, like it's a Florida concentration camp. Yes, I know these are crocodiles, let's all lighten up as the world ends. Both missions are trying to be integrated tutorials, but just end up feeling like filler. Egypt 11 turns things around and feels like we're actually playing the game. We start on an island with no gold and no stone, both of which we'll need to build the wonder required for victory. And we get our first real experience with trading thanks to this adorable Minoan dock. Unlike later games, our ships carry actual resources from our docks, trading them for gold with other players that we receive upon the ship's return. The map takes place on a river delta, providing narrative closure to the campaign, the whole mission having this fun pirate vibe, working to protect our ships as we build island bases to control sea routes, waiting for our merchant marines to do their thing. The enemy even manages to make a surprise amphibious landing when I'm not looking. It's a complete reversal of the earlier missions, using the limitations of its design and systems to make what was genuinely a fun scenario, with lots of twists and turns along the way. Each of the 4 campaigns in the original Age of Empires ends with a final mission meant to be some sort of test or puzzle, perhaps thanks to Tony, or like the secret coin levels in later Mario games. Unfortunately, they aren't labeled as such, with all of them being hard, frustrating, or downright bewildering to a player not expecting them. Egypt's begins with us bottled up in Death Valley, where moving an inch in any direction causes us to get wiped out. We have to survive the first wave, pull some Planet of the Apes shit on this tower, and then survive the second wave, only to be left with no food and no ships. The trick, once you figure it out, is to stay completely hidden like it's some sort of stealth mission, which in my opinion are always a bad idea in an RTS game. Stay hidden long enough and you can squeak by to the second age, build some farms, and then conquer everything as normal. It's a real pain in the butt and just not worth it. The next campaign is Greek and naval themed. Initially, that struck me as an odd choice given we've just left what is effectively the tutorial and are now expanding gameplay to an entirely new system of warfare, one involving docks boats, and amphibious landings. But along with this complexity comes a British shield, a body of water to defend the player from early raids, at least in theory. Unfortunately, the campaign gets off to a rocky start. The first mission is pretty terrible, the second one is fun, and the third interesting, but they all struggle with system limitations, player expectations, and the realities of the game they've built. While the sea offers protection, it also forces us into claustrophobic starts, bottled up on small islands with few resources and not enough room to navigate the terrible pathfinding. The AI too is a problem, launching pretty brutal raids even at the start of the match. Because they're largely operating off of line of sight, the player is directly incentivized to hide in a corner, stealthily accrue resources, building up their civilization until they can send a single devastating counterattack and win the map. The victory conditions don't help either, being solid on paper, but a miss in practice. Creek 2 asks us to capture a relic and build 2 towers to control it, with a neat map of little islands separated by navigable channels. But instead of marching across the archipelago as intended, we just suicide dive a scout to get close and build 2 towers anywhere we want, the game bugging out and giving us the victory anyway. Greek 3 asks us to capture or control 3 ruins. The enemy will push for control of the ruins, leading to a fun back and forth and one of the best missions in the campaign. If Egypt 11 has a fun pirate vibe, this one feels more like the Odyssey, our crew traveling the seas and navigating mazes in search of glory. But the map is let down by the placement of the ruins. We only need to control 3, with 1 where we start, 1 where the enemy is, and 1 in the tower maze. Much of the map, including these other islands, are left totally empty. This means that once we control the tower maze, we can suicide dive a scout to the final location and take control, winning the match. What's meant to be a tug of war instead becomes a pushover. And it's here that I want to wax philosophical about difficulty. Gaming is full of capital D discourse over lower D difficulty, peaking alongside the popularity of the Soulsborne games. It always bothers me in those discussions how focused people are on player skill instead of the design the developers have implemented. Sure, input time matters. A player's ability to recognize a pattern or pull off a tricky maneuver is important. But those inputs exist within the constraints the designer has set. It's the designer that is determining the grace afforded to the player due to a combination of health, damage, hitboxes, and so on that establishes the overall difficulty. The designer does this with full knowledge of the technological limitations their game is under, be it frame rate or draw distance, or the enemy's ability to respond to certain tactics and techniques. Cheesing isn't skill, it isn't getting good, it's exploiting a flaw in the design. When the scenario designers sat down to make Age of Empires, they had several levers to pull in order to make the scenario more or less difficult. Things like making units stronger or weaker, denying or allowing technologies to the player, starting locations, resources, and all the rest. But they have to do this fully understanding the drawbacks and limitations of their system. Unfortunately for Age of Empires, throughout this game, the scenario designers either failed to address this or outright leaned into it. The pathfinding in this game is atrocious, making standard missions more difficult simply due to the nature of the game before a player ever touches their mouse. A scenario designer could mitigate this by giving us a wider area for our base camp, easing the burden of pathfinding and ensuring it doesn't weigh heavily on the difficulty. But the designers here have done the opposite, giving us multiple cramped starting locations that not only fail to mitigate the bad pathfinding, they actively make it worse. This artificially increases the difficulty, regardless of a player's skill. They could offset this with better choices around which technologies and upgrades to give the player, but often instead restrict the player from these upgrades, and start the enemy with a higher armor and attack to add to the misery. It's difficulty for the sake of difficulty and is far from fun. Even worse, it can break the game. Let's deep dive on units for a second. Age of Empires is going for the classic strategy triangle in the form of infantry, archery, and cavalry. This isn't just a hallmark of game design, this is actual real-life military tactics. If you're new to military history and looking for a primer, I highly recommend Art of War in the Western World by Archer Jones. He's definitely dead now, and I admittedly haven't reread this book in like 20 years, but it is the best one-book overview on the subject I've found. It can be a bit pricey given it's from a university press, but I'll post a link to it below if I can find one. The basic idea is that infantry are slow, but are good at holding territory. This makes them weak to archers, which can hit at range and are nimble enough to run away, which you counter by horses, which are much faster and can run them down. Cavalry are then countered by infantry, which can drive stakes into the ground to scare off their horses and generally hold their formation. And if you post in my comments about heavily armored cavalry charges, I will hit you. Those don't really come about till the Middle Ages thanks to the stirrup and are relatively short-lived in the grand scheme of things. Back in the ancient era, aside from cataphracts, heavy cav isn't really a thing. Even well into the gunpowder era, you had pikemen to stop charging cavalry. And finally, for those of you who are confused, Calvary is a hill in Judea where some Jesus happened. Cavalry are mounted soldiers. We all forgive you for using them interchangeably. God knows everyone else does. So Age of Empires, the game we're actually talking about, uses this same real-world system for balanced gameplay. But the designers of this game f***ed it up a bit through a mixture of design decisions and technical limitations, and it directly affects difficulty. In gameplay, we simulate this rock, paper, scissors design through stats. By manipulating attack, defense, mobility, and range, we can make units that are mathematically equal, but have a clear purpose and function in battle. Age of Empires, however, has one additional stat that changes all this math: the cost of a unit. Infantry cost a little food, horses a lot of food, with archers costing some food and some gold. The end result is that players are more likely to build a lot of infantry, only some archers, and a few horses. From a board game standpoint, having units be a hard counter to one another, able to take out their opposite unit without risk or recourse, is fine, as the units are all of an equal cost. But in Age of Empires, when factoring in the different cost of the units, they need to be closer to a soft counter. In effect, archers should be able to trounce infantry for a while, causing heavy losses until the infantry catches up with them. This balances the economic aspect in addition to the unit's stats. In Age of Empires, however, the infantry simply don't move fast enough to ever catch archers. Combined with the poor pathfinding and the computer's ability to perfectly micro, even a single archer can take out an entire squadron of infantry for a fraction of the cost. It's clearly not the intention of the game's design, and it massively shifts how the game works in practice. I actually ran into this once in Axis and Allies, of all things, thanks to a play-by-mail client that was using a flawed dice roller that disproportionately favored ones. This meant that matches turned into a huge slog with dozens and dozens of infantry in each province, as we never had reason to build the other units as intended. So in future discussions about game difficulty, yes, we can blame the player, but remember that's only a third of the equation. We still need to factor in the failings of the technology and the limitations imposed by the scenario's design, both of which can be flawed enough to stack the odds against the player in ways that were never intended. With all that background out of the way, let's talk about Greek 5, which tasks us with spoiling a party of 7 yellow old men, be careful how you Google that, with an opening that is exciting as we get attacked on all sides, forced to run to a river and escape in a boat. We wander through the woods, navigate tower mazes, and keep our wizard safe so he can heal our troops and convert our enemies. We found a town, get some reinforcements, and rescue our impounded boats from the Ionians. We pull some Hannibal business, convert a villager but lose him in a friendly fire accident, and then manage to convert a few more villagers. We can't actually do anything with them as we have no resource drop-off, but we do win the match. It's a mission that sounds cool, but man did it actually suck to play. I've never saved scum so much in an RTS in my life, even if I only ended up reloading the once. That reload was caused by the end, where the match immediately went tits up upon reaching the enemy town because I simply could not keep tabs on everything and micromanage, well, anything effectively. My army dashed upon the rocky cliffs of poor pathfinding, friendly fire, and limited troops. While I can appreciate the big swing, the attempt at a different design, it simply runs counterintuitive to the game they've built. Adding pockets of reinforcements in the woods might have helped, villagers in the town might have saved it, but at the end of the day, everything around an RTS is built upon the idea of making replacement armies. It defines everything from a unit's stats to the game's economy. By removing that core concept, everything else falls apart. We have to be hyper-vigilant over every soldier, kite every enemy, and most importantly, ensure our soldiers aren't pulverized by our own catapult fire. This kind of micromanagement flies in the face of what makes the series great, but I already made a whole video on that. I know the audio on that one is rough, but it's still worth a watch. Greek 6 attempts to continue the cinematic feel, having us defend in Athens under siege by the Spartans. I'm bad at defense, so my city collapses immediately, but I'm good at strategy, so I escape with some villagers on a boat. I get a colony set up, use my surviving boat to chip away at the enemy army, and build up a scout force to exploit the game's buggy victory conditions and take control of the relic. It's a fun mission and was fun to play, but you can feel the game cracking at the seams of its primitive technology. The 7th mission, Xenophon's March, is another one of these walking missions in which we have to traverse a maze, destroy some walls, build a dock, and so forth. And it certainly sounds cinematic. It's the basis for the warriors, after all, but actually playing it is a tedious mess of moving our soldiers up piecemeal, ensuring we don't lose anything to friendly fire. These walking missions create this strange Ouroboros, circling back to an almost dungeon design like in Dungeons & Dragons, retracing Gygax and Artisan's footprints. And while you can do that, it pays to remember they made a new game to enact that playstyle, instead of cramming it awkwardly into an existing one. The final Greek mission is another challenge coin level, this one centered around the building of wonders. Our enemy builds a wonder, starting a countdown timer, with new wonders popping up as the match goes on. We're meant to build an army, squash a wonder, and then wheel around to squish the others, all while fending off attacks. It is an absolute pain in the ass and my least favorite mission thus far. The timer, constant micro, inability to queue unit replacements, and splash damage caused by all the catapults leads to ultimate frustration. In Civ or Total War, I could handle something like this easy, but in Age of Empires, the need to dodge the buggy pathfinding and control the movement and queuing of units causes it all to break down. It's like the RTS equivalent of bad controls. I know mentally what needs to be done and how to do it, but the impulse and commands fail to respond in an accurate or timely enough manner. I'm so busy making sure my catapults aren't nuking my own guys, that my villagers are gathering resources, and that reinforcements are being built, that I don't have time to block enemy attacks or direct individual soldiers so they don't kill their comrades. I like the idea of these challenge levels, but wish they were called out as such, instead of being incorporated into the main campaign. While they are all cool in concept, I wish they played better. Babylon's campaign takes place in the past because that's how history works, and the theme this time around is religion and its tactic of conversion. Like the Greeks, it also gets off to a rough start, with its very first mission providing a handy lesson on what can go wrong when you present a level like it's a sandbox, when in fact it's a puzzle, as you may recall from my Hitman video. The setup is awesome. We start with a single priest and must convert our way to an empire. On our first attempt, we convert a villager, run into an enemy, and promptly die. Second attempt, we use our precognition to go right at the fork, convert a passerby, and watch as our old priest stands around as the young do all the work. Oh, lion. We need our priest to go out and convert more villagers, but he's our only real defense, so we die. I can't build a base because they'll find it, and I can't run because the priest is too slow. In desperation, I bother to read the hints, and they tell me to go east. We try that, head into the woods, convert some more followers, towers along the way. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe, and find some berry bushes, the divine signal that this is a place for a good town. We defend ourselves and convert so many of the villagers passing by that the enemy's economy collapses, causing them to send a desperate all-out attack, and that's the mission. Cool story, fun mission, if you do exactly what the designer wants you to. The game assumes the players will wander east, and if they do anything else, kills them for defying their unseen god. The real problem with this approach in an RTS is how long it takes to play out. A splatformer is reliant on trying over and over again, but loads instantly and dies instantly. For an RTS, you can be 20 minutes into a match before realizing it's hopelessly lost because of a decision you made 15 minutes ago. That penalty of real-world time crushes any motivation or desire for continuation or experimentation, being more frustrating than fun. The second mission is even worse. It's a sea map that wants us to fish and has by far the quietest start, and you know what that means. We get rated by 2 different players and restart. For the second attempt, I can't get wood fast enough to build up a survivable navy, so we try again. Can't hide in the corner like the Greek maps because their boats keep finding me, and I can't build towers because the boats have a longer range than the towers do. I have to age up just to be able to build farms to have a secure food supply and get boats that can fight back. But aging up takes considerable food, and I need that food to make the villagers to get the wood. It's all a mess. And this is why I gave that whole spiel about difficulty. 2-on-1 is already an interesting challenge. Having to defend your fleet of fishermen is too. So why did the designer decide to start us an age behind? Give the enemy boats improved technologies that I don't get access to, give them longer range than my towers, and not give us enough resources on the starting island, all on what is supposed to be the normal difficulty. But I'm committed, so we try again. This time I go all in on the economy, building my towers not along the coast, but close in to my base to defend against the raids, hiding as far back from shore as the botched pathfinding will allow. I'm doing okay until the siege trireme shows up and decide to scatter my doomed fishing fleet, using them as suicide scouts. I age up, improve my towers, and finally get strong enough to fend off the amphibious landings, all while building up my forces and upgrading every tech I can find. I have zero plan moving forward as I need gold to age up, and there's none on the island, and I can't defend a merchant fleet. I find some secret stone, which I mine with a secret storage pit, letting me build my secret towers, to guard a secret dock, to build my secret fleet in secret. Only it turns out to be a lake, which doesn't help me. I then step a few feet away, find the shoreline like someone who isn't a big dum-dum, and finally get to building all my secret stuff. Fleet built, we find an island with indigenous people, lots of gold, and hidden treasure, so it's time to live up to my Spanish heritage. We pull a colonialism, make a mad dash for the other treasure we need to win, and the pathfinding screws me. We build a second fleet, come better armed, and manage to pull it all off. And if I'm being honest, that last run was a lot of fun. Frustrating and stressful, but fun, with lots of maneuvers I could pull and ways to tackle the problem. The issue is the trial and error it took me to get there, boxed in by an unfair and punishing start. And it's not like these lessons are applicable to other matches. They only taught me to beat this one scenario. It didn't make me a better player. All in all, the time playing this scenario totaled 2.5 hours, and while I did have fun, it just wasn't worth it. And sure, I could have cheated my way through, but these are the lengths I go through for you people. I mean, mostly I just wanted to see if I could pull it off, but still, I do it for you. Age of Empires is turning out not to be my favorite, and we still have a lot of game to get through. Babylon 3 is another puzzle level, which I did not like, and the fourth is another mission that requires us to flee on a boat, escape downriver, and rebuild in a better execution of that Greek mission. We're attacked immediately and are only given a boat big enough for 5, so it's villagers and archers first. There's this awesome bit of visual signposting with this lion on the hill that's guarding all the berries and gazelle, and overall this mission was pretty great. Babylon 5, which I'd make a joke about if I bothered watching that show, I'm more of a SG-1 DS9 guy, is another puzzle level in which even the elephants are hostile, and it has all the same problems as all the other puzzle levels. Dungeons & Dragons, which is coming up a lot in this video, can build encounters around combat, traversal, and negotiation because the core mechanic of rolling a die and adding a number works equally well in all three scenarios. These puzzle levels fundamentally don't work because they are breaking the game's existing mechanics, snapping off the economy and strategy instead of reframing or reutilizing them. There's an argument to be made that StarCraft story missions are an exception to this, but this is an Age of Empires video. Babylon 6 is some kind of archer missile command puzzle, and Babylon 7 has us attacked from both sides in a scenario that is fundamentally fine but suffers from the fiddly controls. And finally, Babylon 8 is another bonus coin challenge level which has us destroying a wonder. The attacks are relentless, the enemies well defended, and the pressure constant thanks to the timer, which are always a bad idea in RTSs. Really all games. Timers make you hate the controls, not feel triumphant for getting it at the last second. I can already tell I'm not good enough to beat this level and could waste several hours trying, but it's not worth what's left of my lifespan, and it isn't worth yours either. On to Japan. The Japan campaign is probably the worst of the lot, feeling rushed with limited briefings or historical information throughout. The first mission asks us to lead a raid to assassinate a guy, and it strongly reminded me of those Warcraft 3 scenarios people used to make that turned the game into a pseudo-RPG. Or, Commandos, a real-time tactics series that launched in 1998. There's a mission that asks us to collect 6 treasures and gives our catapult its own boat so it doesn't murder everyone. There's a 2-on-1 map that doesn't have much going for it outside of an interesting layout, and a 3-on-1 map with a big lake in the center. There's a mission with a great concept where we have to defend an ally from getting attacked, buying them time to build up their forces until we can take the enemy out together, but it kind of falls apart thanks to the allied AI being functionally useless, with the final mission being a straight-up 1v1 with resources littered all about the map. No, the only real mission worth talking about in detail is Japan 6, which is not only the most interesting scenario in this campaign, it's probably the best mission in the original Age of Empires altogether. We begin the mission not as the colonizer, but as the colonized. We have to use the game's diplomacy system to pay tribute to our overlords, meeting their periodic demand of 200 gold to keep them happy. Fail to pay and the troops turn hostile, killing our villagers and crushing any would-be rebellion. It's a race against time as your resources dwindle, mining enough gold to keep them happy, all while building up your forces for the inevitable uprising. Now this is the way you use your sandbox to your advantage. The reason this map works so well and succeeds where so many that came before it failed is because it's leveraging the game's core design principles to add to the game being played rather than restrict or break them like so many of the Commando Raid puzzle levels. Like the Babylon mission, it took several attempts and some trial and error to figure out, but I was much more forgiving thanks to the narrative and overall design of the scenario. It didn't feel like I was being punished because of an arbitrary bonus the designer decided to give the enemy, or running out of time because of some random number the designer landed on. It felt like I was being challenged to overthrow my oppressor, running out of time because of their greedy demands. Once you're ready, you can flip your men to hostile and try to win your freedom. The real trick here is to position your guys around their catapult so you can take it out right away, sabotaging the enemy's ability to fight back. My only knock against this scenario is that a neutral player does exist to trade with to get gold, but it can be hard to find. I think the scenario would be better suited having this part of the map be revealed from the start, but that's debatable. Overall, this is a fantastic mission that leverages all of the game's systems to present the player with an interesting challenge, giving them a compelling story, and is easily the most memorable mission in the game. Great work all around. Kudos to whoever designed this one. And that's Age of Empires. So the original Age of Empires is not very good. It turns out the first game in most series are not very good, save for like The Sims or Mario, or a bunch of other games. But the failures here are more of technological limitation and the designers coming to grips with what was still an entirely new genre of video game. It is easy for me 30 years later to be like, hey, puzzle and dungeon levels don't work in an RTS, dummy, but that's because I have 3 decades of experience playing dozens of games in this genre. The people who built this game had exactly 2, Command & Conquer and the original Warcraft. It could have been a case of inexperienced designers struggling to wrap their minds around what to do with a Wargames campaign. Or it could have been young visionaries trying to push the boundaries of what was still a nascent genre. Reasons aside, looking back on this game, we can see why it wasn't the smash hit the series would go on to be. While the initial game was impressive, it hadn't earned its place in gaming history. That would take the dawning of a new age, one less primitive, an age of kings. The years between Age of Empires' release in 1997 and the sequels in 1999 were busy, not just for the industry, but for the genre. Warcraft 2 released in 1995 while Age of Empires was already in production. Total Annihilation released in 97 and StarCraft in 98. According to Matthew Pritchard writing a postmortem for Gamasutra, Age of Empires sold 3 million copies in its first 2 years, and was a consistent seller at the top of the charts. Even without these strong sales, a sequel was guaranteed, with Microsoft contracting the studio for another game before the first was even released. While moving to the Middle Ages for the next game was never in question, the direction for the sequel very much was. The team was divided between playing it safe or experimenting to push their big hit even further. According to Pritchard, the team assumed that by using the existing codebase from Age of Empires, development of a sequel would go much faster, allowing them to build both an entirely new game and cram it full of a wish list of ideas that had been building up during the first game's development. I guess they didn't know about feature creep back then. Predictably, this caused a lot of delays, and Microsoft, their publisher, was less than thrilled. The suits up in Redmond had already promised their executives that an Age of Empires would be released that year in time for the holiday season. Having the game slip due to all these supposed improvements wasn't going to work for their shareholders. So the companies compromised with an expansion, The Rise of Rome, with a firm deadline to ensure a Christmas release. With the expansion out of the way, the team expanded, committed to improving upon the first in every way. According to Pritchard, the 2 biggest complaints were their computer AI and the pathfinding. And I mean, yeah, duh. Tim McDonald, writing for GameSpot, panned the game for being Warcraft in togas, having no complex resource management or intricate economic model, being a simplified combat game rather than a glorious empire builder. He accuses the AI of cheating with resources, complains the PopCap is too small, and that the unit pathfinding and overall lack of intelligence makes it hard to manage armies. Finally, he laments not being able to queue units or set unit stances, and criticizes the game's barks. Rick Sanchez, writing for IGN, criticized the campaign, the pathfinding, the AI, the incidental economy, and the limited diplomacy. It was clear that even though sales were strong, there was plenty of room for improvement. And while these may just sound like reviews, Pritchard directly states they were looking at reviews for things to fix. And many of the things Tim laments in his review, like unit queuing and group stances, would be implemented in Rise of Rome and the sequel. The impact on development was clear, the studio was listening. The team added Mario Grimani, the 89th Doge of Venice. Wait, wrong page. The actual Mario Grimani can only be traced by his credits page on Moby Games, which shows he worked in the industry at least since the 90s and was the AI programmer on Dominion, a Command & Conquer clone developed alongside Age of Empires 2. Mario Gramani and Sandy Peterson rebuilt entirely new scripts for the enemy AI, taking input from the entire team. Sandy Peterson is also ridiculously well credentialed, probably being best known in video games as the one religious guy on the Doom team. But like Bruce Shelley, his credits go back to the tabletop days. Sandy worked on RPGs at Chaosium, contributing to RuneQuest and co-creating Call of Cthulhu all the way back in 1981. He finally joins id Software to work on the Doom and Quake franchises before going to Ensemble in June of 1997 to work on Rise of Rome and then Age of Kings. Sandy talks about his work on the game on his YouTube channel, and as of the time of this writing is still putting out videos. I'll link to it below. Back to the Pritchard post-mortem, pathfinding received a big enough overhaul to require 5 separate people working on it at various points, implementing a multi-layer technique to handle long-range and short-range pathfinding separately. Pritchard goes on to talk about the technical aspects of the game and the lessons learned, which again are all well worth reading. If you're interested, I would do so quickly because there's no telling how long these articles will survive on the Wayback Machine. Alright, so now we know what they set out to change and why they wanted to change it. Age of Empires 2, The Age of Kings, released in September of 1999 to a highly anticipated audience, myself among them. Let's see how they did. But of course, this is a video game retrospective, and there are some technical issues. The game in its original form is becoming increasingly hard to come by, aside from buying a disc and CD drive to go along with it. There is an official upload by Ensemble Studios on the Internet Archive, which we love to see, but it uses a proprietary format called BlindWrite, which doesn't seem to work. There's also a copy uploaded by Gable, but it is the Conqueror's expansion. Microsoft really needs to do a better job with this stuff. They have the resources, there's no excuse. Some may wonder why I'm going through all the trouble and not just using the much easier to find expansion from the start, or the definitive edition, which is basically the same game. But here it really matters, not only because of the graphical differences, but the AI and campaigns, both which were updated in the definitive edition. I can't very well bash Age of Empires' crappy AI and then praise Age of Kings to high heaven if the computer AI I'm praising is actually from decades later. So we're going to go with the Conquerors as it's as close as I can get. Remember, I do all of this for free in my spare time. Go buy my books. A brief note about the music. A lot of these cracked versions have a problem where the music doesn't play. This is a damn shame because the soundtrack by Stephen Rippey is just an all-time killer album, which I still listen to. These cracked versions don't play the music because it's read directly off the disc. The CD has to be mounted in order for the game to read it. This is atypical for games, but is the very reason I fell in love with this soundtrack to begin with. Way back in the 90s, I had that disc loaded in the CD tray, opened Windows Media Player for some reason or other, and realized I could just listen to the soundtrack straight from the CD wherever I wanted. It's followed me on every device I've owned ever since. So while there won't be a lot of music in this capture footage, and I won't really be talking about the music here in any detail, as I'm not a music critic, just know that I love this soundtrack. It rules. You should go listen to it. Once in the actual game, we can see the historical mission briefings have been removed and consolidated into this library. I remember reading through some of these as a kid. It's what we had to do before Wikipedia existed in between trips to the library and in Carta 95. The tutorial campaign is about old William Wallace thanks to 1995's Braveheart. Each mission gives us a bit of storybook time to establish the narrative, and there's not much to comment on here. The tutorials are competent, the voice acting is fun, the scenarios interesting enough for a tutorial, and the illustrations lovely. I really should learn to draw one of these days. Joan of Arc, the first real campaign, opens on an awesome map instead of a simple list, and the cutscene, though simple, does a good job of establishing time, tone, and place. The first mission is a walking mission, but one with characters, voice acting, and soldiers that join us along the way. Little vignettes playing out to keep things interesting. We have a hero unit that slowly regenerates health and can put our troops into formations and stances, such as guarding Joan. Follow is also really helpful, as formations will travel at the speed of the slowest member. If we put our catapult in the army, the whole army crawls. But with the follow command, we can have the catapult creep behind without slowing everyone else down or having to micromanage it manually. For a walking mission, this isn't bad, from bandits to wolves, broken bridges, and walled cities, even an ambush and an escape downriver. There's some interesting old-fashioned level design on display, the developers only having so much space given the size of the map, using the winding path of the river to stretch out the distance and make the player feel like they're crossing a greater expanse, broken up by interesting encounters. Solid opening all around. Joan 3 shows that while there have been many improvements, this is still Age of Empires under the hood. We have to defend 3 castles starting on a little island and sailing across the river to set up a town. Things start a bit slow getting our economy going to age up and build siege engines. The enemy does regularly harass us, but the raids are all manageable and the map never feels too punishing. That's thanks in part to new quality of life features like improvements to the pathfinding and the alarm bell, which tells all our villagers to run for cover when the enemy raids, and then dispatches them back to work when the attack is over, sending them to whatever chore they were doing last. Not everything is perfect. I still think infantry moves too slow. The combination of speed and the computer's ability to micro, making archers basically invulnerable to infantry, and gold is a consistent bottleneck. I never felt like I had enough of it on this map, even after killing the Burgundians and taking theirs, as every important unit and upgrade requires it. The pace of these matches is also slower, often requiring us to make a town and age up several times before reaching parity with our opponent. Enemy towers guard extra resources and enemy raids help to distract us, forcing the player to alternate between an economic and military mindset. And all of these missions have a limited pop cap of 75, even though the game can go to 200. I bottle the river with castles for defense and then send my army against the enemy, only to watch them melt. The limited pop cap keeps me stretched thin and means it takes time to rebuild my armies, which is much easier due to the advent of queuing. We're in no danger of losing, the enemy raids are all easily managed, but it does mean I'll need to get clever if I want to win, especially since I'm running out of gold. I decide to use my brain for something other than complaining and bait the enemy army into attacking my wall of castles. We counterattack, brush aside the enemy cavalry charge, and that's the first one done. Then it's just a matter of rinse and repeat until taking out the other 2. Joan's 5th mission just completely misses the mark, and it's going to require another conversation about difficulty, hopefully illustrating why designer choice matters just as much as player skill and technical limitation. This mission features a stunningly beautiful map of Paris and the narrator's warning that we're about to be betrayed. We have to get in, get some villagers, and get out. We descend into the chaos of fiddly micromanagement and struggle through double walls in a sea of towers. We run for our lives as the hints told us to do, get the villagers, and then still manage to lose for some reason, probably because too many of the villagers died. Not knowing what I could have possibly done differently, for the first and only time in this retrospective, I knock it down to easy. And suddenly, everything changes. The enemy priests are gone. The towers are gone. The enemy army decimated. We do the mission again, get betrayed as was foretold, and escape Paris by punching a hole in the wall and simply walking out. On easy, this mission is non-existent, little more than a cutscene, and on moderate, it is damn near impossible, one of the worst missions in the entire series. Like, forget the design, who playtested this? And the thing I really want to hammer home is that all of these elements are choices. Each group of enemies, each tower, every individual one, a decision someone made. The game does tell us just to run for it, but the pathfinding can't handle it, and the double gates prevent it. Having us lose if too many villagers or Joan dies is a choice. Failure condition layered on failure condition. It was a choice to give the enemy catapults which chew through our forces, and to make the enemies all well-armored, upgraded soldiers instead of militiamen, which would have the numbers to reinforce the fantasy while still being possible to cut through. One of the reasons being able to reinforce our armies in an RTS is so vital is because these games are so unpredictable. A catapult shot going wide can make or break a formation. It's a total roll of the dice. It's why Axis and allies in Risk rely as much on economics and positioning as they do on army size and dice rolls. This map feels like it was built around the concept of micro, and I don't know why anyone would do that. It's just the worst part of these games, not just from a player preference standpoint, but from a technological one. The end result is not one of impressive history or edge-of-your-seat action, and feels more like chewing asphalt in search of fun. Our next campaign, that of Saladin, starts with a walking mission which is lame, but one in which destroying a barracks gives us upgrades, and the map from the cutscene matches the map in the mission, which is pretty cool. Saladin 2 has us killing pirates while our allies tribute us gold, with relics and bandits giving us good reason to explore. It's a fun little scenario with a decent start, a good map, and allies getting attacked, all with plenty of room to experiment, even if I get raided because I'm not paying attention. It's one of the better missions so far. Saladin's third mission is the first dual camp mission, which would go on to be a staple of the series. We're split across two bases, the first having food and wood, the second with gold. We can buy stone, but the scenario locks us out from building walls, towers, or castles. And here's where we need to talk about PopCap. The game goes to 200 per player, but all of these scenarios lock it at 75, and that becomes a problem, which we can illustrate by comparing and contrasting two similar missions. Joan's final mission is a 3-on-1 fight and requires 3 entire armies to win. 1 to defend against orange, 1 to guard against purple, combining both defense forces to fend off red. This leaves open a third army that we can use to counterattack, knocking out an opponent and turning the tide in our favor. Given the limited pop cap and every scenario starting us behind our opponents, both economically and technologically, we spend much of the map marshalling our forces as we age up until at last reaching parity. The end result is that the pop cap feels as much as an enemy as the people we're fighting. Back to Saladin, we have 4 enemy factions and a wide border that must be defended. Again, the enemy starts fully upgrading with us behind the curb, but crucially, unlike Joan, Saladin isn't allowed to build towers. While that's an interesting challenge, it highlights and exacerbates the PopCap issue, because in these games, defenses counter PopCap. In a straight 1v1, I have to split my army between offense and defense. The more opponents we have, the more I have to split my army, making smaller groups to defend against larger armies. Remember, our opponents have the same PopCap we do, meaning it's 75 per opponent. We're literally outnumbered. Fortifications, be they towers or castles, offset this, acting as defense that doesn't count towards our pop cap. This not only means we can have a larger number of defenders, it frees up our other soldiers for attack. In Joan's mission, I was able to use walls and fortifications to slow down and whittle away the enemy forces, freeing up troops for the offensive to knock out an enemy and swing the balance in my favor. But in Saladin's mission, we are denied this, requiring us to somehow fend off 4-to-1 odds, subjected to constant raids, with diminished population cap, a large portion of which is occupied by our villagers. I think the intent in these big defense missions is for it to feel like Minas Tirith. standing against some massive horde. But the end result is less of a triumph and more like slogging through the mud, the long tech-up time against superior forces feeling less like the rebels against the Empire and more like the RTS equivalent of bullet sponge. We know where we're going and how to get there, it just takes forever to do so. Saladin's last two missions are both good. Mission 5 starts us bottled up on a peninsula and features the first strong naval match of Age of Empires 2. The naval gameplay is the same on land with the same rock, paper, scissors formula and all the same problems of micromanagement and cognitive load that entails. It functionally adds a new dimension of having to manage land battles, sea battles, and the economy simultaneously without really adding anything to the gameplay. It's not better or different, it's just more. And if I'm being honest, I think largely fails as a design, capturing neither the complexity or fantasy of naval combat. Thankfully, later games will do this better. Saladin 6 has us defending the city of Acre, rushing to construct a wonder as we hold against an onslaught of enemies. Defense missions are never my favorite in RTSs given how prone they are to death spirals and how difficult the balance is to get right. Even the briefing warns us this one might turn into an unmanageable mess. But the mission itself is actually fine. No, the thing I really want to talk about is siege units. I'm obviously not a fan of having two micro-individual units, that much is clear by now. I always considered Age of Empires to be in the middle of that spectrum, but between archers and catapults, units require a lot from a player's attention. Spending significant time with this game after all these years has impressed upon me how much I don't like how siege weapons are implemented in this game. The intent is to extend the rock, paper, scissors formula into a lizard Spock, adding siege weapons and defensive emplacements. This works, but is not as clean as we would think. Defensive buildings counter archers and cavalry, but are weak to sustained attacks from large numbers of infantry, reinforced by an economic model in which infantry are cheap and castles expensive. Siege, meanwhile, is meant to be slow, vulnerable, and expensive, but devastatingly powerful. They're near literally glass cannons, the wizard of the military world, and we all know how I love wizards. But the siege in this game, while vulnerable, is not particularly slow and slaughters just about every type of unit, able to only be effectively countered by huge swaths of infantry or micromanaged cavalry. The end result is a system in which catapults, which aren't that effective in real life, are the most powerful thing on the battlefield, able to liquidate entire armies unless immediately prioritized for destruction. Compare that to, say, the trebuchet, which fills the role of siege both historically and mechanically, perfect within the existing rock, paper, scissors structure. As sacrilegious as it is to say about such a beloved game, I think this entire game functions better and would be more interesting to play if you removed every siege unit from the game except battering rams and trebuchets, as they do a much better job of maintaining the rock, paper, scissors balance than ballistas or catapults, which feel like they're here as a throwback to Age of Empires 1. The campaign of one Genghis Khan, yes, I'm going to pronounce it Genghis, is by far the most experimental, for better or worse, each mission attempting to push the boundaries of what an Age of Empires mission can be. Khan 1 starts us with no orders, just a command to wait, so at least they're sticking to military realism. The Khan shows up and orders us to unite the tribes. We do this by traveling to various banners, which gives us straight-up quests, the completion of which adds that tribe's units to our growing horde. Tribe 1 wants a relic that can only be carried by monks, which we don't have. Tribe 2 wants us to kill a tribe we haven't met, if that just doesn't sum up American foreign policy. And Tribe 3 wants us to bring them 20 sheep. Sounds good to me. I get wrecked by a catapult because they're the worst part of this game, and reload. We get to this fence, know there's about to be some free and quick save before rescuing the rest of our lost flock. Bringing the sheep home gets us monks because Christianity, and we go off in search of a lost relic. On the way, we find Tribe 4, which are the people Tribe 2 wants us to kill. Tribe 4's quest is unsurprisingly to kill Tribe 2, forcing us to pick a side. We head off to think about it, find some wolves guarding a relic because paganism, and then find Tribe 5 that wants us to hunt a super wolf like we're some kind of witcher. We follow a trail of dead bodies up a mountain, kill the wolf, and are rewarded with flaming arrows, and it's at this point I'll remind you we're playing Age of Empires. Tribe 4 has a tower guarding them while Tribe 2 definitely does not, so we trek back across the map, change our allegiance, murder them all, and send a scout to Tribe 4 with word of our victory, and that's the mission. There are a few other things littered about the map to find, but I didn't, so they might as well not exist. And this mission is fun, an interesting change of pace, but really only works the once. It's the designers flexing what they can do with their engine. And sure, you can build an RPG inside of Age of Empires. It doesn't mean that you should. Con 2 has us gaining villagers by, liberating them, and Con 3 wants us to deal with the Great Wall of China. It warns us in advance that it's 4-on-1 and our defenses won't hold, so I can already tell I'm going to hate this one. We start the mission with basically nothing, wander through the woods until we rescue these engineers, and are allowed to build a base. We put down just an load of towers because we know a counterattack is coming, and surprisingly, it all goes fine. And then the wonder starts, meaning this mission is on a timer. So to recap, we start with nothing, have to build a base from scratch, defend against 4 enemy players, punch through a super wall, and destroy a wonder, which by the way is across a river, all while under the artificial pressure of a timer. And again, I ask, why? Who is this for? It's like really spicy food where the only point is to claim what a badass you are simply for enduring it. Bad mission, basically another Paris. I find this design of difficulty for the sake of difficulty to be deeply juvenile, and I wish designers would just grow past it. Con 4 is another dual camp mission where we fight Russians in the north and Persians in the south, and I'd make another joke about American foreign policy here, but it's too depressing. The North Camp has all the wood, the South Camp has all the gold and stone, and they're separated by a big mountain chain, preventing them from reinforcing each other. Finally, we have an added gimmick of getting some trade carts to a city to assassinate a hiding Shah. According to the wiki, a failed assassination results in the Persians getting an extra 2,000 food and gold, and will train 40 villagers instead of 25, meaning they will absolutely steamroll us. The assassination goes okay, and the mission overall is fine, if a bit loaded down by gimmicks. Con 5 has us pulling a Thermopylae among some mountain passes, and Con 6 has us holding a river for 40 minutes until reinforcements arrive. The river is frozen with only a bridge between us, presenting an interesting choice of holding the bridge or relying on defense and depth, and that's the Con campaign. Our final campaign takes us to Barbarossa's Germany, and the first mission ends up being a pleasant surprise. We start on an island surrounded by 6 enemies and are told we must capture 4 of 6 relics to win. The game encourages us to kill as many people as early as possible before they get strong enough to snowball us, adding to the pressure. It sets up like it's going to be another Great Wall of China mission, but this one has a few differences that make it far more bearable. For one, we start in the Castle Age, and second, we start on an island with a bunch of resources, with access to the island controlled by bridges. Thus, we only have to fend off the early raids while rush mining stone to bury the entire island in castles. With plenty of defenses and resources at our disposal, we can then counterpunch with our own army as intended, knocking the enemies out one by one. The map is cool too, with its river layout, a ruined monastery to find, and a pocket of Mongols who will join us for a steal of a price, just 200 gold. Even the objective of only having to capture 4 of the 6 relics let us avoid the enemies we'd rather not fight. It's a great mission that rewards player intelligence and exploration, challenging without ever being too punishing. It's one of the best missions in the game, A+. And then Barbarossa's second mission just straight up fails. We're Germans who want to invade Poland because history, and we've got this guy who works for us that we want to get rid of. So we pull a King David, sending him off to war so we can bang his wife. Test his loyalty. We start with troops and no villagers like it's some kind of walking mission, but then realize it's a defense mission. By defending our allies, they'll give us tribute to augment our fledgling economy of fishing boats and trading cogs. The enemy doesn't have villagers either, so we mostly sit around knocking out castles and wait to be betrayed. Then we're given villagers and it devolves into a normal match, and it just isn't fun to play. I get the challenge the designers are facing here of trying to twist real history into these scenarios. I just don't understand why they are so committed to taking away the economic mechanics when it's half the damn game. And I guess I should explain how trading works in this game. Probably should have done that earlier. Instead of transporting real resources like before, trade carts now work on the basis of distance. They can still only trade with allied, neutral, or enemy markets, never your own, making them next to useless 1v1, but indispensable in team matches. Trade carts wander between the two markets, depositing gold on the return trip. The longer the distance, the more gold they carry. A simpler implementation than Age of Empires, but here I don't actually mind that streamlining, as it was far too easy in that game to accidentally sell all the wood or some other resource you needed simply by not paying close enough attention. My only real knock here is the continued requirement of needing to trade with another player. You should absolutely be able to trade with yourself, the distance being the penalty. This incentivizes a player to explore, to build additional bases, and gives them longer supply lines they have to defend against raids. It's better balanced, more useful, and inspires better gameplay than the requirement they've gone with. It's just a bad mechanic as currently implemented. Barbarossa 4 asks us to build a wonder in one of three places. Our opening settlement is doomed from the word go, so we flee on boats and stumble into a whole navy. We run to a faraway island and try to rebuild. The attacks are constant and punishing, making this one not much fun, but at least the map is cool. Barb 5 is a walk somewhere mission in which 10 troops must survive. It's a big map with a lot of one-off triggers, including a house ambush and a navy to unlock. And mission 6 involves us getting a body to a funeral and is timed. And if you think my descriptions are running thin, so is the game's. Much like Japan in Age of Empires 1, the briefings substantially thin out here, and the whole thing ends up feeling kind of rushed. It's a real shame too, because Barbarossa's first mission is one of the best in the game, and then the rest of the campaign just feels half-baked. And that's Age of Empires 2. For all my complaints, it is still an undeniably great game and holds up well all these years later. It's easy for me to nitpick design implementation or the scenarios they've built, but it's worth remembering how early in the genre this game still is, how few examples there were to go off of, the entire idea of an RTS being less than a decade old. Even with such limited experience, this team managed to make substantial improvements on the first game, under what sounds like heavy crunch and the weight of their own ambition, to create an entirely new fork in the genre, a third pillar in the pantheon of real-time strategy that still manages to stand tall even today. Age of Kings is a game with a long legacy, a lot of neat ideas, and some fumbling about within a new genre that had yet to fully form. Built by a team with a surprising pedigree that struggled to adapt their tabletop role-playing leanings onto a game built around armies and economics. An undeniably great game that improved on its predecessor in every way, but never fully overcame its challenges, a struggle that would live on in its successors. The height of an empire, perhaps, but one that was not to last. 3 long years would pass between the 1999 release of Age of Kings and the 2002 release of its successor. While 3 years isn't much in today's game development cycle, back then yearly or 2-year cycles were the norm. The nascent RTS genre, now a decade old, brimmed with creativity as people sought to expand, modernize, and refine this new splinter of the medium. The biggest and most cataclysmic of these was, of course, StarCraft, released in 1998 while Age of Kings was still in development. StarCraft had 3 asymmetric factions building off of Warcraft's 2, pushed far harder into the realms of narrative and story, and featured a strong reliance on player-triggered unit abilities. It was an incredible game and an undeniable landmark in RTS history, causing a cataclysmic separation and design sensibilities that would dominate the genre throughout its heyday, as discussed in the grenade video, bad audio, and all. But StarCraft wasn't the only one experimenting with the form. Total Annihilation released in '97 and focused on massive battles with a singular commander unit that possessed its own abilities. Homeworld released in '99 with a campaign that focused not on a base, but a mothership and her fleet, all while introducing the concept of 3-dimensional space battles. But the most interesting of all these contenders, at least for the purposes of our narrative, is Empire Earth. Empire Earth was the first game made by Stainless Steel Studios, a company founded by Rick Goodman, brother of Tony Goodman, and one of the original designers of Age of Empires. And they are obviously very similar games, so what gives? According to an interview archived on Empire's Haven, Rick Goodman originally lived in Boston and moved to Dallas to work on Age of Empires. During development, he starts dreaming of a sequel in which you would progress through all the ages rather than simply shifting to the medieval period. He knew it would take time, a lot longer than the 1-year development cycle Microsoft was expecting for Age of Kings. And you know, that sounds plausible enough, but hey, I've got a brother. I can read between the lines. Whatever their creative differences may have been, Tony moves back to Boston and starts his own company in 1998. They begin work on their own game, which finally released in August 2001. Empire Earth is certainly familiar. Villagers and resources and the like, but now we choose a civ once we're in a match, and can make our own through a point-buy system. Settlements act as a gathering point for all resources and are upgraded into town centers by garrisoning people inside them, with aging up gated by how many of those upgraded town centers you have. Herds populate over time, incentivizing you not to over-harvest them. Priests are back and have brought prophets along with them, a special type of unit that builds up power points and can use them to unleash devastating powers like tornadoes or volcanoes. Remember that for later. We get hero units that upgrade with each age, granaries which have farming plots already associated with them, and wonders which have bonuses but are not unique per player and don't seem to change with each age, unlike the later Rise of Nations. Pop cap is much higher, and garrison troops don't count towards it, allowing you to do a manpower bomb, hiding them in a castle until the castle is destroyed. Unfortunately, most upgrades are simple point values, many of which are next to useless. Things like +5 to pop cap. Not +5 per house, just an extra 5 dudes you can build. Who thinks that's exciting? There are some other oddities and wonkiness to the UI, but the main draw is the breadth of eras covered. We can build tanks and planes, the latter of which have fuel and will return to base when they run out. Aircraft carriers complete with their own mini-planes, nukes, who doesn't love nukes, and sending mechs off to fight horsemen. Rare to see a game that both starts and ends with Goa'uld technology. The game is undeniably within the mold of Age of Empires, but teching up through the various epochs gives the game its own spin. We can see why these teams, these creators, would split, chasing different visions of what the series could be. My only real complaint about the epoch system is that there are too many of them. While it's cool to see the difference between, say, planes in World War I and World War II, a match doesn't last long enough for that difference to really play out. This is also something Civilization has struggled with over its series history. Units also automatically upgrade, which is a nice quality of life feature, but means we just don't see tanks and planes in their primitive forms long enough. Feels like they could have consolidated and polished rather than trying to cram so much in. Remember kids, feature creep is the enemy. I mean, and Nazis, but mostly feature creep. Back in Texas, Ensemble wasn't just moving in a different direction, they were moving in an entirely different dimension. A third dimension. According to an interview with Amer Anjami via GameSpot, dated January 30th, 2001, Tony Goodman said they began work on a 3D engine alongside Age of Kings. Tony refers to the game simply as RTS 3 and won't confirm whether or not Microsoft is the publisher. He says that it's a very Age-like game and that history fans and fantasy fans will both be pleased with the title, but adds little else outside of PR bullet points. This is surprising as just 3 months later, in May of 2001, GameSpot and IGN would break the news that Microsoft acquired Ensemble outright, with the team hard at work on Age of Mythology. I couldn't find how much the company sold for, but this is the same era that Microsoft bought up companies like Bungie, fleshing out their in-house development. With their publisher now their owner, development on the game continued. According to an excellent 3-part dev diary by Greg Street, originally posted on GameSpy in August of 2002, the team spent a lot of time debating over how to incorporate new mythological units and god powers into this fantasy spin-off, particularly in how it would fit into the existing rock, paper, scissors design, ultimately deciding to get rid of stone in place of a new resource, favor. With much of the internal debate focused on how powers should be implemented, and more crucially, balanced, the core gameplay would stay the same. Age of Mythology, released on Halloween of 2002. But first, a word from our sponsor. Hi, it's me. I'm the sponsor. Did you know I write books? Fantasy books, among other things, but no one reads those. Who am I kidding? No one reads the fantasy books either. Which is why I'm here, because you should read my books. You can get them digitally or in print through Amazon. Thrice Dead Witch is a creepy fun story about a team of adventurers sent to a remote village to investigate the disappearances of local children. No spoilers as to what's causing it, but you can read the same cover I can. And Eye of Sil is about a team of competing adventurers sent across the continent to track down a lost ancient relic of unknowable power. Both books are better than those descriptions make them sound and are available now. Picking up a book is the best way to support the channel and makes me the happiest, so please go do that. Okay, enough of the ad, back to the video. Our first campaign is The Greeks by way of Atlantis, the game making a bold 3D statement right from the jump, with in-engine cutscenes complete with voice acting. They introduce not just a faction or a nation, but actual characters, whose story we'll be following throughout this game. The missions here are straightforward. We defend Atlantis until our army arrives. Kraken and Cyclopses throw people, we get chickens and pigs in addition to sheep, and we can farm favor at temples. We use that favor to buy mythological units and mythological upgrades, carving out their own niche in the game's economy. We can summon heroes at town centers, and aging up allows us to select one of 2 gods, each one subtly shifting the playstyle of our faction, unlocking new powers, units, and upgrades. Although the biggest change here might actually be the town settlements, which are static and pre-placed at important areas of the map. We simply build on top of them rather than being allowed to build anywhere we please. Taking one over also gives us a nice boost to our pop cap, making them a vital resource to fight over, tipping the balance towards whatever player has the most momentum. Relics also return, but now offer unique upgrades and bonuses instead of a simple trickle of gold, making them far more useful and thus more likely to be fought over. Farms no longer exhaust, siege weapons are still here for some reason, and finally market donkeys can now trade with our own town centers, instead of having to rely on other players, making them actually worth building. Our campaign hero, Arkantos, has a morale ability that thankfully auto-triggers, as does the Medusa's ability to turn us into stone. Heroes and mythological units are both important because they establish a second overlapping rock, paper, scissors loop. Hero units are good against myth units are good against normies, and normies can mob hero units in large numbers. Then there's the god powers. We get 1 per age, and they can only be used once, so use them wisely. Early on, these are things like animal lures easing our early economy, or a ceasefire that can protect us from an early raid. Later, they get more useful, like Aphrodite turning our enemies into pigs, or Apollo giving us a Stargate, before finally getting to really cool stuff like Hera's lightning storm or Hephaestus's vault, which steadily produces resources and is easily my favorite of the bunch. Mission 4 has us stealing Trojan gold and gives us a new god, which means no more free Sea House Scout. It's replaced by Force Lightning, which, let's be honest, is all I've ever wanted in life. And this mission provides a good early example of how game-changing these new god powers can be. Our goal is to destroy an enemy gate, which has exactly one solution in the previous ages of empires. Here, in the time of mythology, I can forego those cursed siege engines altogether, use my Pegasus to scout over the enemy walls, and activate Apollo's quantum tunnel to teleport my army inside. I am, after all, more wizard than fighter. All of this combines to make a game that feels easier and plays smoother. The abilities that auto-trigger, infinite farms, and the reduced number of overall buildings makes the game handle better, erasing much of the micromanaging burdens of earlier titles. Mission 6 has us building a Trojan horse, Mission 7 has the Ship of Fingernails, which gives us food, gross, and Mission 8 has a fun spin on the dual camp idea from Age of Kings. It almost reads like a co-op map where some fortresses block Ajax's path, but can be eliminated by Arkantos' army, and vice versa. The placement of the town settlements also matters here, defending certain routes on the map. Our armies link up and smash the enemy in what is easily the best mission so far in Age of Mythology. Mission 9 is a weird one in which we have to use a standing army to destroy a ram before it can destroy a gate, making it both a standing army mission and a timed mission. We attack the gate, enemies pour in, and then allied reinforcements arrive, giving us a two-sided siege situation, making it also a defensive mission. For being a map comprised of my 3 least favorite mission types of walking, defending, and being timed, this one isn't bad. Mission 10 is a puzzle level with ghosts, Mission 11 brings us to Egypt, and 13 is a gimmick match in which we play tug-of-war over a cart. And if it sounds like I'm just kind of running through these, that's because there isn't much to say. Age of Mythology's focus on named characters and a cohesive story is interesting, a refreshing touch from earlier games, but it results in levels that are narrower in focus and quick to play, meaning there just isn't much to talk about here without a play-by-play of each match, which would both be exhausting and people didn't really seem to like in the Hitman video. On to Egypt. Egypt shows us there's more new here than just the gods, with the Egyptians bringing in fresh faces to what will ultimately be one continuous story. And a new faction, which plays differently than the Greeks. Hard to imagine this narrative focus and asymmetric flavor aren't both inspired by StarCraft. As for playstyle, the Egyptians are all about gold, which they use to pay for buildings in place of wood. Instead of praying at temples like the Atlanteans, they build monuments which generate favor passively, getting stronger and more expensive with each one they build. Finally, they also get a pharaoh unit, which can enhance a structure, such as a farm, making it work faster. Mission 15 has us picking up directly where 14's prison break left off. We set sail and fight some pirates, get a village, and see it's a pretty huge map with just an insane amount of goats. We use our god power to upgrade our town settlement into a citadel and get attacked on land and sea, making it feel like the first real mission in a while. We find a relic that generates a trio of monkeys and can build a special lighthouse that's really good at being a lighthouse. Meanwhile, destroying the enemy's lighthouse causes them to crash into the rocks and stop raiding us. In many ways, Mission 15 is the ideal mission for the Age of Mythology. We get a cool story beat, some fun myth units to play with, and a wide open map for experimentation and exploration. Mission 16 is a weird one in which our main characters plan at dawn because they're fans of Critical Role, and then we have a mission about our dead son. This continues into 16 Part 2, in which we play as the bad guys from the beginning of the game to destroy our own city, which is both very messed up and very fun. Hades is our god now, meaning our dead soldiers turn into shades. There are relics absolutely everywhere, and the enemy isn't shy about hitting us with their god powers. We use some good old-fashioned pincer attacks for the first time in the Age of Mythology, and our own god powers to break down their walls and destroy their wonder. It's just a really good intersection of gameplay and narrative, and it's in missions like this where Age of Empires as a series shines as a whole. This isn't a misguided stealth mission, a frustrating time mission, or one made difficult through the asinine limitations imposed by the designer. It's a solid challenge of steady attacks and a strong enemy that we have to overcome, aided by a map design that favors defense and flanking maneuvers. Mission 17, which sees us returning to Egypt, bugged out on me. I had a lot of that happening with Age of Mythology, including the cutscenes, and it was at this point I gave up and tried the Titans expansion, but ran into the same problem. Some needed scripts just don't trigger, so I ended up switching to the extended edition. While not as historically accurate, I do need to actually play the games in order to comment on them, so it'll have to do. Anyway, Mission 17 ends up being a cool map, even if a bit easy. We get a really long coastline full of settlements that join Amon-Ra as she passes. There are plenty of relics to go fishing for, and it's all fine. The real problem is the enemy never really attacks, their navy patrolling back and forth as the only speed bump. The lack of enemy defenses and Thoth's meteor power make things a pushover, turning a great layout into a forgettable skirmish. I know I complained a lot about the difficulty in Age of Kings, but Mythology has the opposite problem, often being downright too easy to pose any kind of real challenge. Even though I'm playing all of these missions on moderate, the enemy doesn't seem to attack that often and rarely in numbers big enough to be a serious threat. It leaves one with the impression of the enemy AI being broken rather than an intentional design choice, as though I were accidentally playing on easy. Maybe the designers were feeling that way themselves, as Mission 18 was the first time I actually felt threatened in this game. The Norse show up, we realize we all hate Cyclops together, and there are tombs in the desert that continually generate enemies until we destroy them. We start with no immediate gold, little wood, and are under constant pressure from enemy attacks along different flanks. This is to introduce us to the Norse's faction ability to use mobile oxen as a drop-off point. We use them to get the gold and age up, getting another barracks going, as we'll need to make troops quickly if we want to keep up with the enemy attacks. The AI is still quite dumb, but the better pathfinding and reduced micromanagement makes it all a lot easier to handle. The real clutch in turning the tide here is our old pal Osiris, who gives us mummies. Much like Doctor Who, they make these little bug attacks that turn our enemies into our minions. Most importantly, he gives us the Son of Osiris, one of my favorite things in this game ever since I first played it back in the day. I really love this choice, forcing us to choose between Thoth, go bravely with Thoth, who gives us the devastatingly awesome meteor power, or Osiris, who gives us a Goa'uld with a lightning staff, capable of holding down an entire flank on his own. The trick is that Meteor can absolutely devastate an enemy base, but is one and done. The Son of Osiris, on the other hand, stays on the map until killed. Not as flashy, but able to take out raids or even small armies all on his own, especially when protected by loyal followers. It's an obvious trade-off, the big flashy boom or the long-term useful soldier, but one which I think a lot of players can intuitively grasp, and most importantly, enjoy making. Way cooler than +5 to this or 100 bonus to that. Back to Mission 18, we have a King of the Hill fight over a tree, using choke points to control the flow of the match. I especially like the map design, not only with all these little routes and expansions, but the layout of the enemy camp, broken up into 3 parts. One of which guards some relics and protects a flank, one which controls the objective, and one in the rear that acts as the enemy's base. The resources littered about the maps and the tombs draw us deeper into exploration, rewarding us with a bounty of treasure for each one we take out. Great mission all around. One of the more annoying things about the campaign and about Egypt in general are Isis's monuments, which prevent god powers from being used within a certain radius, usually built within the enemy base. And I get that from a skirmish standpoint, some of the late game powers can be pretty devastating, and some players are just not going to want to deal with that. So giving them an in-game option to avoid it is reasonable. My problem is that many of the game's campaign missions also use them, meaning there's no use in saving our spells for the climactic showdown, instead often wasting them on small mobs of enemies or outposts. The fantasy here is wandering into the enemy town and laying waste to it with Meteor or Hera's lightning storm, but many a campaign mission blocks you from doing so, likely out of a fear that it would be too easy or game-breaking, and that's just dumb. If you're going to give your players cool tools, don't restrict their ability to use them. The 20th mission is also fine. It's another split camp mission, but one in which we can cut through the woods to link up our forces. Arcantos shows up and we actually have 3 camps to deal with. I drop a fortress near his, but he's never really attacked, so it wasn't needed. While a little disappointing, it does make 3 camps easier to juggle. One of the biggest problems this game has, as highlighted by my Son of Osiris getting murked when I wasn't looking, the unit AI really likes standing around and getting shot. Their response radius is often much shorter than the range of the people attacking them, meaning armies are willing to stand around and get slaughtered rather than fight back. Before we can get to being proper Norsemen, we have to remind everyone mythology is in the title, getting a mission in which we get turned into a boar and have to herd pigs while killing villagers. Passing some very confused guards, we reach a temple that turns us back into real boys, and from there we play a regular match. While this is a silly breather episode a la the Muppet episode of Angel, it's a ton of fun and it's great to see the boars doing the hunting for once. The island is worth exploring with a bunch of animal-themed relics scattered about, including the one that gives us a Pegasus, the one that gives us monkeys, and the one that gives us lions. A gimmick, sure, but a well-executed one and a nice diversion from all the sand and snow. On to the Norse. Our first Norse mission has Cyclops using a poem to scatter our forces with an avalanche, meaning we have to gather them up like airborne troops on D-Day. There are some big wolves, and it seems the main difference with the Norse economy, aside from their ox carts, are they get dwarves. Said dwarves are good at mining gold and bad at everything else. Additionally, gatherers can gather but not build, and infantry can build but not gather. Our town centers can also train soldiers, making them our starting barracks. And then for the real kick in the teeth, the Norse do not get farms until age 2 and must instead hunt for all their food, meaning our economy is centered on the idea of mobility. The Norse god abilities also vary widely in usefulness. Forseti gives us a healing spring, obviously helpful, while Freya lets us set a forest on fire, which while a neat visual, is basically useless. It will damage units or enemies in its path, but how often will that really matter? And sure, it denies them some wood, but wood is always the most plentiful resource. It sounds cool, it looks cool, but when are you ever actually going to use it? She does, however, also give us Valkyries that can heal, which is mega useful, so we go with her anyway. One of the interesting things about having 3 factions, each with their own playstyle and aesthetic, is it can lead to a player choosing against their own preferences. Back in the day, I usually played as the Egyptians because I liked the powers the most, namely the Son of Osiris. But it's really the Greek playstyle that I'm best suited to, with the Norse having the aesthetic I like the most. You could see that as me never really being fully satisfied with the faction I'm playing. Or if you're more favorable, then I always have at least one thing I like about said faction. But I think it's equally important for getting people to try different things. Playing StarCraft as a kid, I basically only ever played Protoss, given that it had both the aesthetic and playstyle I wanted. There was never a reason, outside of the campaign, to play the other 2. In something like Dawn of War, I switch back and forth between Space Marines and Necrons, the 2 armies I actually had when playing 40k, and Imperial Guard, the army I wanted but never got, because I appreciated the differences in playstyle and aesthetic. It's a tricky design problem. Is it better to make, say, a fire-themed people who are fast and aggressive, and an ice people who are slow and defensive, fully leaning into a marriage of gameplay and aesthetic, or is it better to mix and match, to entice more people to experiment? Mission 23 has a real 13th Warrior vibe that suffers from weak execution of its ideas. And Mission 24 begins with this strange misdirection, where they have us meet a crazy old man who absolutely should be Odin because that's how Norse myths work, but ends up being Loki because trickery, I guess. The mission is also bad, just a bunch of weird triggers, forcing us to walk 5 feet before we can play the mission. 25 is also bad. It's a puzzle level in which we have to lure enemy leaders outside their walls and into a trap of towers, and just nothing about it works. A half-baked, not well-tested mission. Mission 26 has us uniting the clans and feels like a tutorial that somehow got placed at the end of the game instead of the beginning. Mission 28 has the narrative completely falling apart, requiring us to build up a base even though it starts 20 feet from the end of the last mission, where we had a fully functional one. We have to alternate between fighting above ground in the underworld, ending with us retreating even though we won, so Chiron can Gandalf himself in Moria. All of these Norse missions create an impression that the game really went for quantity over quality, having a bunch of mediocre ideas instead of 5 or 6 great ones. I wonder if they felt constrained by the new 3D engine, realizing they would have to make smaller maps, and thus tried to make up for it by adding more of them. Or perhaps they just wanted a bigger number for the back of the box. Either way, the end result is a lot of missions that are forgettable filler. Mission 29 has us reforging Thor's hammer. Mission 30 has Ajax shooting a diplomat like he's playing Cosmic Encounter, and then it's Odysseus' turn to pull a Gandalf when he shows up on the 3rd day with an army to save us. Mission 31 has us making landfall while getting hit with meteors because the Cyclops loves reenacting D-Day. We rescue some Athenians, fight some dinosaurs, and overall have a good time. One of the best missions in the game. Mission 32 is the final mission of Mythology's campaign and sees us finally returning home to build a wonder in order to secure Zeus's blessing. Both our allies are here, one Norse and one Egyptian, to help cover our flanks, tying the 3 campaigns together. We get a bunch of uses of meteor thanks to Zeus, which I use to fuck up the enemy camps by suicide diving my grunts behind enemy lines. We kill the Cyclops, build the wonder, kill a statue, and the island sinks because that's how history works. Our heroes wonder what happened to our Kantos, and instead of leaving it to our imaginations, we get a very abrupt cutscene where he's revived, nothing else happens, and we jump cut to credits. I'd criticize that choice, but if you've read my books, you know I'm in no position to throw stones in that particular glass house. We end with some fun VO bloopers and get a bunch of pictures of the crew. Age of Mythology is such a mixed bag. On the one hand, I think I vastly prefer its moment-to-moment gameplay over both Age of Empires 1 and 2. That may seem odd given how allergic I am to micro and how much more this game focuses on units and abilities, but a lot of those auto-cast. The god powers are only used once, so it's not like we're constantly worried about them. Farms don't need to be reseeded, and there are less buildings to worry about. While some of the god powers and units are hit and miss, I think they work for the most part and are far more enjoyable than the siege weapons from Age of Kings. A catapult shredding my army because of poor micro is frustrating because that's just not how catapults work. But a kraken decimating my army by throwing soldiers around, that is both realistic and super fun to watch. The foray into asymmetric warfare feels hesitant, not pushing as far as StarCraft in its different playstyles. But Age of Mythology counters this by letting us choose a different god each age, crafting our own civilization over the course of a match, given our needs at the time. The campaign has some truly great missions, some of the best in the entire series, and also has a bunch of filler that feels thin and forgettable, boxed in by small maps of limited routes along predictable channels. What this really looks like in many ways is Age of Empires 1, a game pushing in new directions, not all of which worked, but which showed interesting promise. Unfortunately for all of us, there would never be an Age of Mythology 2 that would get to further refine and improve upon these ideas. A proper Age of Mythology 2 back in the day could have been as big as a hit as Age of Kings. Even more tragic, the next game in the series would split the difference, trying to incorporate some of mythology's fables while returning to its historic roots. A decision which would divide the fan base and ultimately would mark the end of an empire. Age of Mythology was perhaps unsurprisingly well received. Steve Butts wrote for IGN that Mythology was more polished and gripping than previous efforts, praising the story as more relatable than Tales of William Wallace. Though critical of the limited AI, he still awarded the game a 9.3 out of 10. Greg Kasavin, writing for GameStop, said, "Mythology executes its concept extremely well, and represents arguably the most refined example of the genre, giving it a 9.2 out of 10. The game sold well, some 870,000 copies over a period of 4 years, according to Edge. The industry continued to progress in the 3 years it would take for Age of Empires to return. 2001 gave us Star Wars Galactic Battlegrounds, a Star Wars clone of Age of Empires built on Ensemble's engine. Warcraft 3 released in July of 2002, just shy of Age of Mythology's release. 2003 brought us Command & Conquer Generals, with its 3 asymmetric factions, and Empire's Dawn of the Modern World, Stainless Steel's follow-up to Empire Earth. Dawn of the Modern World, which I've talked about on this channel before in the context of D&D of all things, had a really cool system in which your nation could evolve into a successor nation halfway through the match, something even Civilization is still experimenting with, and which is very reminiscent of Mythology's god system. And finally, 2002 gives us Rise of Nations, which may not be the best RTS, but is my personal favorite. It was the first game made by Big Huge Games, a company founded by Brian Reynolds, one of the co-founders of Firaxis and the lead designer on Civilization 2. According to an interview with Doug Kaufman for HeavenGames.com, Brian wanted Civilization to move into a real-time direction for Civ 3. When that idea was shot down, he split off to do his own thing in a story very similar to Rick Goodman's. Like Empire Earth, Rise of Nations advances through the ages, including airplanes in the various epochs, hewing pretty close to Stainless Steel's model with their own improvements and additions, most notably how towns and territory works. I talked about Rise of Nations a lot in the grenade video, so I won't belabor it here, but you can see this is yet another branch on the tree, one that not only takes influence from the descendants of Age of Empires, but which stretches all the way back to the common ancestor of Civilization and the impact that series had on the industry, the two influencing one another in an ongoing conversation of design. 2004 gives us Lord of the Rings Battle for Middle-earth, which was never one of mine, but I know a lot of people are fond of it. And we get Dawn of War, the Warhammer 40k RTS made by Relic Entertainment, the people who made Homeworld. I cannot definitively say that Dawn of War was the first RTS to use its control point style system without additional research, but it is at least the one that would popularize it, creating a new branch of design on the RTS tree. That at last brings us to 2005 and the long-awaited sequel to the Age of Kings. I'm gonna level with you, I can't find jack shit on this game's development outside of E3 coverage, and this one interview with Greg Street, which if I'm being honest, I found by accident while checking the spelling of his name, which, no shade to him, just sounds like PR fluff and doesn't have much of substance. Maybe that's because of the constant degradation in Google's usefulness, maybe people just weren't that interested by 2005, but either way, coverage is pretty sparse. Gameprey, the religious-themed gaming periodical. Gameprey. Anyway. Gumpro? Jesus brain. GamePro doesn't even mention it in their E3 PC coverage. PC Gamer may have mentioned it in their RTS Revolution issue in September of '05, but I can't find a scan of it and they don't mention it on the cover, instead talking about Dawn of War. PC Gamer did make it their cover story in February of 2005, months before the game's October release, but by the time it came out, the world was quiet. No anticipation, no postmortems, no developer interviews with the legends that made it. So what happened? Were RTSs wearing thin? Were people too busy playing San Andreas and Resident Evil 4 to care, or was this long-lived empire at last headed for decline? Let's take a look at Age of Empires 3. Once again, we have a single continuous story, this time divided into 3 acts, the first of which has some Assassin's Creed characters several years before that game would exist. The writing is serviceable, if a bit rough, and the 3D engine looks better than ever. While the graphics won't blow anyone away, the low-poly aesthetic still holds up compared to Mythology's more primitive 3D. Unfortunately, that graphical prowess comes at a cost, with a round map that is far, far smaller than past games, and a UI that is much larger. We can adjust the UI in the options, but the game warns us that will decrease performance. This is because the game is using that UI to hide more of the screen and not render it, a trick that goes all the way back to the Ultima series, as Madular covers in his excellent retrospective. I'll link to it below. The end result is a game that feels smaller but packs more of a graphical punch, looking less like paper cutouts and more like a miniature diorama, with falling trees, crumbling buildings, and roaring cannons. Mission 2 carries forward the map design of Age of Mythologies, with caves and multiple routes to the objective, both by land and sea. The game also mentions the Crusades and Atlantis, letting us know it's a direct sequel to the earlier games. There's a wide host of small changes that add up to the game feeling quite different. We're down to only 3 resources: food, wood, and gold, with stone and favor being rendered obsolete by the invention of gunpowder. Farms come preceded with a max capacity of 10 villagers, meaning the big bottleneck here is wood. I'll let you make your own joke there. Even bigger, villagers no longer have to carry supplies back to a drop-off point. They just farm it, eliminating the need to worry about infrastructure or defending supply lines. They basically took the mobile Norse ideas from mythology and made it the entire game. Units can now be built in batches, popping out in little squads, though they still exist and operate individually instead of, say, a block like in Total War, or a squad like in Dawn of War. Priests are back, but their healing ability has to be manually triggered and is therefore useless. And you can only build one church, which is used to research improvements that might as well not exist, such as increasing hit points while reducing speed. I think these are meant to offer different strategies like tactics, but never seem worth the trade-off. I feel the same way about cursed items and roguelites. Bad design. Villagers no longer repair buildings, instead it's done through a button in the UI, which is an odd choice. While it reduces micro, which I'm always in favor of, it also eliminates a decision from the player. Previously, one had to decide to task a villager with repairs, reducing that villager's economic gain to save a structure, to choose between the economy and security, but that's all gone now in favor of faster play. Naval gameplay has been completely overhauled for the better, the best it will ever be in the entire series. Boats have a limit of how many you can build, but are far more powerful, able to bomb city defenses, launch a full broadside, or even produce troops. Boats will even repair on their own if near a dock, which makes sense given how boats work. It really helps them to feel like actual boats, like their own method of warfare, rather than copy-pasting land units and painting them to look different. They even go the extra mile by giving boats individual names. It's cute and plays all the better for it. And finally, there are the governors. When we age up, we get a choice between 2 governors, similar to Age of Mythology's system of picking between 2 gods. Unfortunately, this time around, it is in a far more limited capacity. There's no powers to pick here, no unit types or unique upgrades. Instead, each governor gives us a one-time boon, typically of resources or a cluster of free units. Big downgrade in my opinion. Mission 4 introduces us to the home city mechanic, the largest change in Age of Empires 3, even if it doesn't have the biggest impact on gameplay. When playing the game, we earn XP for murdering things, be they soldiers or civilians, for finding treasure and completing objectives. Filling our XP meter awards us with a shipment, which we can use to play cards, which are held in a deck and unlocked as we level up. Remember, this is an Age of Empires game. So really, we do have 4 resources in this game, it's just that XP is non-diegetic, functionally replacing favor. Oddly, I don't know why they didn't just call it that, as favor still makes sense given we're requesting things from the monarchy back home. Cards can be used to dispatch troops, give resources, grant upgrades, or improve units. It's functionally a separate gameplay pillar, positioned halfway between the technology upgrades of the normal games and the god powers of mythology. Within a match, cards are gated per age, preventing you from using too powerful ones too early, and cards can generally be played once per match, so you have to think about when to deploy them. I think there's a second implied choice here of holding shipments until later ages when they might be more important, compared to playing cheaper but less good cards now, but that just never actually happens. Because we earn XP for killing things and this is a war game, it's always flooding in, never once being an issue in my entire playthrough. In effect, they took all the god stuff from mythology and broke it down into 2 subsystems, one of the governor's choice and one of playing cards. Unfortunately, neither system is really robust enough to feel important. The governor choices are often obvious and arbitrary, and the deck mechanics are totally irrelevant, never coming into play. Sure, you can suit your deck to your playstyle, but the deck is large enough, the cards few enough, and the bonuses clearly superior to earlier ones that there isn't much in the way of strategy or customization here. They also make just a classic game design blunder here that I have to point out in the hopes developers will stop doing it. Some of the cards in this game take gold to use, quite a bit of gold too, like the mercenary card which costs a shipment, plus 400 gold for a batch of troops. The problem is that to play a card we have to kill a bunch of stuff to get experience, earning a shipment which we then use to play the card. The cost of the card is the time it took to earn the shipment, and expending the shipment itself. Having to pay gold on top of that makes me never want to use this card. Designers will often do this, putting cost and restrictions on top of already something that has a cost, and just don't. Bad design. Next, we should talk about the trading post mechanic, which replaces the cart system from Kings and mythology. Instead of building carts or donkeys to earn gold by traveling back and forth between markets, there are now static trading posts on the map. Some of these are on native settlements, because colonialism, which allows us to build units from those tribes, different tribes offering different types of units. Other trading posts are on roads, which when taken over will gradually produce a single type of unit, with the player choosing between food, wood, gold, or XP per route. Routes can also be upgraded from carts to stagecoaches and eventually trains, running faster and earning more, though the trains don't actually hit anything, which is a huge disappointment after seeing it in generals. This is similar to a system in Rise of Nations in which a trading post has to be built on a specific resource in order to gain its benefit, and I suspect exists for much the same reason. It encourages the player to explore, to stake their claim, and then have something to fight over. Speaking of Rise of Nations, one of the big swing and misses with the map design this time around is the new treasure system. The map is littered with little treasures, protected by guardians that must be defeated before they can be harvested. Doing so gives us a little food, gold, a unit, or a couple villagers. This is meant to incentivize exploration. We've seen this exact mechanic before in both Civilization with its villages and Rise of Nations with its treasures littered about the map. The big difference here is that in Rise of Nations and Civilization, any unit can claim those resources, done typically by scouts, which are cheap, expendable, and fast-moving. In Age of Empires 3, they made the questionable decision to have only heroes and villagers be able to reclaim Guardian sites. Villagers are cheap but busy villaging, and often aren't strong enough to defeat the Guardians. Soldiers can kill the protective enemies but not gather the resources, with heroes being the only thing that can do both, which means you only end up sending the heroes to do it. Far more damning are the rewards themselves, which are so piddly as to never be worth the trouble. Why take the effort to find a treasure, dispatch a hero, fight a little combat, and tell the hero to manually reclaim the treasure for like 50 food? It's just useless and not worth the attention of the player when they're busy trying to win a match. Up till now, I haven't talked much about the missions in Age of Empires 3, and that's because they're all fine. Mission 4 has a cool star fort, Mission 5 has us defending Aztec temples like we're back in Hitman. The maps feel small and limited, even more so than Mythology, but are well designed with alternate routes to attack by or be attacked from. Towers are much stronger in this game, which I love, and units now have tactics, an improvement on the stances of yore. Instead of just picking aggressive or defensive, some units have tactics with specific trade-offs, like being able to take cover, which provides a bonus against ranged attacks. Speaking of which, the explosions look so much better in this game. The flash of fire and smoke, the physics and sound, all contributing to something that feels far more impactful. The game even does a great audio thing where we can hear cannons in the distance to know something's under attack. An effect Relic will use in Company of Heroes in future years, as I covered in the Art of the Bark episode. It all works together to really capture the improvement that gunpowder and cannons were over the ballistas and catapults of the past. There's also no splash damage, meaning we don't have to worry about liquidating our own armies through friendly fire like in the first game. The sixth mission is another one of those RPG quest types. Build a trading post, find some treasure, return some cows to a farm, bring a lost boy back home, all under steady attacks to give some sense of pressure. And then we run into another one of Age of Empires' 3 strange experiments that don't make much sense. See, we can build livestock pens, which allows us to train sheep that will fatten over time. And I can't help but ask, why does this exist? I don't want to recapitulate the whole why sheep video here, you can just go watch it. So I'll just point out, we already have farms. Like, this whole building is just redundant and completely misses the point of sheep. Maybe they felt bad because with treasure existing, sheep were no longer needed. Did the sheep union ensure they still kept their jobs? It's just baffling. It speaks to a larger problem in Age of Empires 3 of ideas that lack cohesion, a problem I'm increasingly seeing with modern game design, and everything from Jedi Fallen Order, as we've already discussed, to Midnight Suns. None of these mechanics are bad per se, I just don't know what they're doing in this game. Mission 7 has a fun King of the Hill mechanic using some treasure ships, and expands on the shallow river crossing of earlier games to give us full-on swamps, because Florida. And the final mission of this campaign has us using a giant gun to destroy the Fountain of Youth, so the bad guys can't be immortal. It's a map with a lot going on, multiple naval attacks, land attacks, defending the gun, cool level, decent campaign, on to Act 2. We leave our Scottish ancestor behind and pick up our story with his grandson, going from Assassin's Creed to the Lone Ranger. Our Native American sidekick has super hearing cause man, racist tropes die hard, and we have to hold a colony for 15 minutes. It's interesting trying to watch them zigzag the racism. Like, we can take over trading posts to enlist Native American allies, which is problematic for several reasons, but you know, the Native Americans did side with the colonists sometimes in like actual history, and they at least go through the trouble of having different tribes with different units. And then in this mission, they have the Cherokee attack while making sure to say they're normally peaceful, attempting to distance themselves from the racist trope of the Native American horde so common in Westerns. But they're still using the trope. Like, we aren't playing as the Cherokee wondering why the normally peaceful English are attacking. They're trying to steal their cake and colonize it too. Mission 10 brings back the continuity railroading problem from Mythology, where we defend a town and rescue a village, only to have us still lose. starting the next mission with the town destroyed. At least they make the village we rescued our new base, which is a fun touch. That map also has a sliver of water allowing us to call in our boats, which is dumb, and then use them to bomb this church high up on a cliff, which is even dumber. Mission 11 is a dual camp mission where our friend's sister, meaning she's automatically the love interest, is in one camp with our normal group in the other and the British in the middle. But really it's just a puzzle level where we have to attack the British camp to lure attacks away from the northern camp and is quite tedious to play once you figure it out. Mission 12 has George Washington show up to tell us the English really are good guys and all the villains are just traitors. The writing isn't great. I have zero investment in any of these characters, the only real positive thing being the decent voice acting. 13 is a very strange mission in which we aren't allowed boats and must wait for Washington's navy, but also can't let Warwick, he's the bad guy, can't let his ships reach our end zone. It's supposed to be a two-phase mission: secure the coast, sail across the river, secure another coast while the navies duke it out, but it fails for a lot of reasons that are unique to Age of Empires 3, and one of the reasons that while I like the way the units in this game operate, I don't like their maps. The units in this game are simple and intuitive. Pikemen are slow, but hardy and good at stopping cavalry. Crossbowmen are decent at range. Minutemen have slow but devastating fire. Formations can be chewed apart by cannon, which are countered by cavalry, who can respond quicker than most infantry, but are weak to pikemen. It's not exactly rock, paper, scissors, lizard, more a loop of hard counters, but it works well. I may be biased because it's infantry focused, which I prefer, and limits cannons to what cannons are meant for, but it's all a lot easier to manage than earlier games. But then you get to the maps and they're just so small. There's very little exploration, instead being a dense nest of forests and paths. Treasure and trade routes are supposed to lure us forward, but are quickly found and not worth the effort to control. The reduced scope makes it feel both streamlined and claustrophobic. Its many ideas and mechanics tangled, yet disconnected from one another. So back to Mission 13. This scenario is a really good idea and would be a lot more fun to play if they just let me build my own docks instead of waiting on Washington. On a larger, proper map, this would be a fun island versus island brawl where our troops cross the shallows as our navies duke it out for control of the river, made all the better by Age of Empires 3's stronger naval mechanics. But their desire to force Washington into the picture in the limited size of the maps makes a lot of these levels feel like snacks without substance, leaving a player hungry for more, never fully satisfied by what they get. Mission 14 has us headed west like it's Red Dead Redemption, and gives us a relic called the Armor of Arcantos, meaning it's not just my imagination, the game really is continuing that continuity, even if it's only in an Easter egg. It's another earn request quest mission and has all the same problems they all do. It's not as good as the Uniting Tribe mission in the Mongol campaign of Age of Kings, and doesn't really work within the game's systems, but I do admit I like them a hell of a lot better than the Walking Dungeon missions. And then Mission 15, I think, is the first in AoE 3 that just doesn't work from a design standpoint. The Russians show up and we have to destroy mountain passes to block their cannons from getting through. If 10 cannons get to the end zone, it's game over. On paper, with just this, it's not a half-bad mission. The map is littered with stone archways that workers can collapse, closing off certain passes to make routes more predictable and easier to defend. Seems normal enough, but it's everything else in this mission that causes it not to work. First, we have two town centers, one with our military buildings, one with economic, and settlers across both. So we have to juggle two settlements, the mining archway operation and the defense against the cannons. Second, we have to do this arch work with special miner units that spawn periodically. They can't do anything else, and there's no way to speed them up, meaning they have to be escorted. Each cannon is guarded by a decent force who will attack the miners if they see them. You combine that with the slow movement speed, the occasionally buggy or poor pathfinding, and everything about this mission feels like a tedious chore. It's a bunch of concepts thrown onto each other wrapped around a gimmick. Spectacle disguising the lack of substance. On to Act 3. Act 3, Mission 1, might be easier to track what mission I'm talking about that way, brings in trains, and now we're taking the shoes of our narrator. Our immortal great-grandfather shows up and says cryptic things, which means it's time to play as the Americans. We get some railroad workers who can't gather or build anything outside of trade posts, but do throw dynamite like it's some kind of moonshine grenade. We can also build a factory, which basically works like a trade post, steadily making resources or artillery, and a nice update to the Temple of Plenty from Age of Mythology. Our home city is now St. Louis, which will make the two Missourians I know happy, and we can now go all the way up to a 5th age to build something called a town capital building. The 5th age is unfortunately just another gimmick in this game that doesn't work. There are few upgrades, and the capital building improvements are meant to be these late game changers, but they just aren't worth the resource cost. A player is way better off putting those into armies. Again, we can compare it to Rise of Nations, whose late game ultra technologies are all super awesome and actively game changing, like the shield that blocks nukes, or the thing that makes units instantly produce. Act 3, Mission 2 introduces a creepy evil guy because everything in this game's writing is one note, and for Mission 3 we get a walking mission with Kanya Inke from the previous act, and it's just downright bad. It feels like a fan creation or a first draft with a gimmick of food deliveries that results in us walking forward, shooting some guys, then walking forward again. Nothing about this game's mechanics enhances or furthers this style of gameplay. Mission 4 I was originally pretty sour on, but it did grow on me. We're headed back to Florida to redestroy the Fountain of Youth. It's the same map, and we start it pre-explored, but the landscape is different. The water is all gone as we destroyed the spring last go around, and it's now a muddy swamp. Some of the cliffs are hard to read, but the game does a good job of using its various layers of elevation, and we can even retake the big gun. While a fairly standard mission, it does a good job of weaving map design, mission design, and the story they're telling into something that feels continuous and intentional, rather than a random assortment of strung together levels. This mission also ends with Cooper dying, who has had zero character development in this act and whose death has no impact. The writer is only doing it because Cooper no longer has a purpose in this story, and if you've read my books, you'll know I approve of the tactic. Mission 5 of Act 3 has us going to Venezuela to kill the Spanish so we can find a Frenchman. We help Bolivar liberate some towns in a decent little gimmick mission. And then we have an absolutely god-awful mission in which we have to walk through some mountain passes, taking damage from the cold, and healing by sitting next to fires, all while under the constant pressure of a pursuing army. Whoever thought this mission was a good idea should be actively punished. I can't tell if it's blind ambition or insecurity that the core mechanics can't sustain a full campaign, but nothing about this mission works. Like, the goal here is narrative, trying to tell a story about perseverance, but this is done way better in a cutscene. I mean, we only see a few shots of the Fellowship trying to get over the cold mountains for a reason. Even in Red Dead 2, which spends the better part of an hour in an environment like this, slowing our movement and limiting gameplay, does it as a tutorial, restricting the play space and providing both a narrative and mechanical contrast to the wide open plains we'll soon be in, showing the gang at their lowest point before we climb back out. Age of Empires 3's Mountain Pass is just the corridor missions from Hitman 2 all over again, and it just sucks so hard. Mission 6 has us defending the Inca while helping artillery traverse this long road so we can use it against the Russians, which is just a great idea for a mission, except the game gives us a factory which infinitely produces cannons, rendering the whole concept of the scenario useless. Like, come on guys, did you not think this one through? The final mission reminds us that the Americans are unreliable, and we get an awesome map where the Spanish are dug in behind a double fortified peninsula, complete with those heavy guns we were using before. Havana dukes it out with the Bone Guard until our reinforcements arrive in what I think is supposed to be a nod to the Cuban War for Independence / the American-Spanish War. We kill everything, and that's the game. Age of Empires 3 is just a mess of a thing. I remember people being pretty down on it at the time, and I considered myself to be something of a 3 defender. It's Hitman Absolution all over again. But with Age of Empires 3, it's clear where the criticisms and the fan reaction are coming from. This isn't just a company going with a different style, this is a game in which many of its core ideas straight up don't work, often struggling to maintain a cohesive identity. The singular thought I kept coming back to in playing this game was, who is this for? It's clearly not a straight sequel to Age of Empires 2, as 4 would end up being. It's clearly not a straight sequel to Age of Mythology, even though it takes a lot of influence and inspiration from that title. It almost feels like it's trying to unite the two fan bases and instead ends up in a mushy middle of mechanics that don't click well with either. This is why a design salad can be such a dangerous thing, even if every modern designer is committed to doing it. In some ways, I wonder if they felt trapped by the advancing of ages with each sequel, of struggling to capture the Gunpowder Age, or if they felt pressured from the massive successes of other RTS franchises and the general advances of the genre. But while that may excuse things like having more player abilities or a focus on heroes, it doesn't really explain the other choices. Sure, smaller maps and unit sizes can be explained by the technology, but why the poorly implemented treasure system? Why the system of cards and home cities? Like, sure, you're trying to evoke the colonial era and the shipments from the home country, but the implementation and design of that system has little to do with this genre. One of the oddest things about Age of Empires 3 is that they clearly put a lot of time and effort into new systems that aren't worth the player's effort to engage with them. Cards and decks, governors and treasures that just don't end up mattering in the grand scheme of things. This sharply contrasts with Age of Mythology, which added a ton in terms of the gods, their powers, and their mythological units, but which fit seamlessly alongside the existing gameplay of the series. You could have just as easily made this work like Powers and CNC Generals, dropping resources or paratroopers from the sky. And while the decks provide some customization to playstyle, that's what the factions are supposed to be for. I think the biggest misstep in this game's design is taking the really compelling god choice on Age Up for Mythology and breaking it in half. On the one side, we have the governors and their one-time boon, which is rarely a challenging choice, and on the other, we have this weird XP card-based system that feels like it's from another game. Instead of improving upon and refining the system from Mythology, they simply broke it and left us with two systems that failed to accomplish either goal. In a lot of ways, I feel bad for Age of Empires 3 because it is a good game, both in its core mechanics and in its campaign, which, aside from all the nagging, I did enjoy. But this evokes the all too often image of a visionary that thinks they're about to reach some greater plateau, only to come crashing down. Age of Empires 3 did not mark a new revolution in RTS design. It did not strike out into brave horizons or push the envelope forward. Instead, it made some sometimes baffling, sometimes overly safe decisions that would feel more like a dying gasp than a blaze of glory. It was the last Age of Empires game Ensemble would ever make, and begin the company's slow decline and eventual dissolution. A once great empire lying dormant, waiting for the chance to rise again. Oh, Christ. I didn't record any of that. No audio on any of that. God. Fuck. Though reviews for the third Age of Empires were favorable, the community remained firmly with the Age of Kings. The 3 years that followed were not kind to Ensemble or the RTS genre as a whole. 2005 gives us Empire Earth 2 and Black and White 2. 06 gives us Relic's Company of Heroes, a World War II RTS with just some phenomenal barks, and Rise of Legends, a fantasy-based follow-up to Rise of Nations. We get DEF CON, one of the coolest little indie RTSs to ever exist, and Star Wars Empire at War. 07 gives us Command & Conquer 3, Empire Earth 3, Supreme Commander, and World and Conflict, with the forever interesting Sins of a Solar Empire coming in 2008, another game with great barks. It was clear even in those days that the once revolutionary genre was running on fumes, starved for innovation as it became increasingly reliant on sequels and homogeneous design, leading us at long last to Ensemble's swan song, Halo Wars, released in 2009, nearly 5 years after the release of Age of Empires 3. Halo Wars, if you've never played it, is a strange thing. A console RTS that plays closer to Command & Conquer or Dawn of War than Age of Empires, even though it's made by Ensemble. We have generals with unique units and powers like Command & Conquer, units that deploy in squads like Dawn of War, and unit barks and voice acting that are damn near a one-for-one recreation of StarCraft. The small maps consist of predictable paths and choke points, with set locations on which we can build bases, the neutral flood helping to slow things down. There are even special sites we can take control of to unleash those flood on our enemies, or ourselves if we're still learning how the game works. Supplies trickle in, the rate increasing as we build more supply depots on our limited build spots. We can also build reactors, which act as a gate on both the types of buildings we can construct and the types of technologies we can research. Our powers are paid through the same resource, allowing us to call in reinforcements like CNC's paratroopers, redeploy troops via Pelican like Apollo's quantum tunnel from mythology, or call in a Mac gun like Toth's Meteor. In short, it's a solid, if somewhat simplified, RTS that takes influence from seemingly every path of RTS design. Is Halo Wars the omni-RTS the industry has been searching for? A final convergence of the three main branches, bringing unity to the medium once and for all? Well, not according to Microsoft, because they shut down the studio before the game was even out. News broke back in 2008 that Microsoft would close Ensemble following completion of the game. Perhaps fated as such, Ensemble acquired a year after Bungie was brought on board, and sunsetted a year after Bungie left, their fates linked through a convergence of time and Halo. Much of Ensemble was laid off following the news, with only a skeleton crew remaining behind to finish the game. The world had simply moved on from the RTS genre, preferring first-person shooters and MMOs. As the old empire fell, smaller kingdoms would flee to distant lands and rise from the studio's ashes. Tony Goodman formed Robot Entertainment, beginning work on Age of Empires Online, before handing it off to Gas Powered Games, a studio formed by Chris Taylor of Total Annihilation fame. Gas Powered Games made the aforementioned Supreme Commander, and a sort of proto-MOBA called Demigod, before ultimately closing in 2018. Robot Entertainment, meanwhile, would leave the real-time strategy genre altogether, instead pivoting to tower defense with Orcs Must Die. While they've been through a few rough cycles of investment and layoffs, they're still around today. Bill Jackson, David Rippey, Scott Winsett, and Stephen Rippey broke off to form Bonfire Studios, which made mobile games, eventually being acquired by Zynga, renamed to Zynga Dallas, and ultimately shut down. David, Scott, and Bill would flee that wreckage to form Bossfire Entertainment, which was acquired by Netflix in 2002 and is still around. Funnily enough, there is an entirely separate Bonfire Studios formed in 2016 by people who worked at Blizzard, including Josh Masquerera, who worked in tabletop at White Wolf, at Relic on Company of Heroes and Dawn of War, and on Homeworld 2. Meaning there have been not one, but two companies named Bonfire Studios, formed from the survivors of different RTS companies. This second Bonfire is still around, and as far as I can tell has been making one unreleased game since 2018, and Morgan Webb works there now. God, this industry is weird. And let us not forget Paul Bettner, who would form New Toy Inc., which made mobile games like Chess with Friends and Word with Friends, would get acquired by Zynga for $50 million, renamed to Zynga with Friends, and dissolved 2 years later. This industry just burns through money like there's no tomorrow. Do you have any idea what I could accomplish with $50 million? Speaking of which, one final word from our sponsor. Yeah, the sponsor is still me. I didn't magically get a sponsorship between segments. Hey, did you know I make games? You can buy them on itch.io or DriveThruRPG. There's Shoots and Strawberries, a fun, family-friendly game played with dominoes about fruit futures. And there's the Wintermore RPG, based on the setting from my novels, about a group of students solving a mystery at their magical academy. I put a hell of a lot of work into that thing, and it has sold, to date, exactly 6 copies. So I'd really appreciate it if more people checked it out. Then I too can get acquired by a tech company for tens of millions of dollars, never actually release anything, and be heralded for it. Alright, enough of the ad. Let's talk about the continued decline of the RTS genre. The RTS industry continued to fade from public view as the ashes of Ensemble were scattered. Halo Wars released in 2009 alongside Dawn of War 2. 2010 gave us Ruse, a very weird game, Supreme Commander 2, the first chapter of StarCraft 2, and Zero AD, an open source RTS that began as an Age of Kings mod and is still being worked on as of January of this year. While these games all did solid numbers and the return of StarCraft helped to keep the RTS genre in the news, real-time strategy games had become a niche of the hardcore rather than the mainstream blockbuster of yesteryear. What fanbase remained had completely fractured, with the micro-focused moving on to an entirely new genre. The MOBA, ushered into the mainstream by games like 2009's League of Legends and 2013's Dota 2. Meanwhile, macro players were drifting off to Total War or Paradox's grand strategy games. While the occasional RTS would still release, they were throwbacks to earlier designs, or sought to appease both the micro and macro sensibilities, ending up in a mushy middle that failed to motivate either camp, resulting in lackluster sales and little lasting memory. Age of Empires would remain a ghost of the past, maintained in the public consciousness through re-releases and remakes. Age of Empires 2 HD Edition hits in 2013, Age of Empires Definitive Edition in 2018, 2's Definitive Edition in 2019, ending with 3's Definitive Edition in 2020. While there were occasional experiments happening elsewhere in the genre, all of the big players had by this point gone away. Ensemble was no more. Blizzard was the company making Hearthstone and Diablo, not StarCraft or Warcraft. Now, across this vast industry, there was really only one major player left in the true RTS space. One studio continuing to carry that banner, even as it stumbled with struggles of its own. Relic. We don't have time for a full retrospective on Relic Entertainment here, given we're probably 2 hours into this video, but the basics are pretty predictable. It's a studio founded in '97, a year which keeps coming up, by a bunch of Canadians. They're responsible for the Homeworld series, Dawn of War, and Company of Heroes, which are all bangers within the genre, even if they're considered a tier below the holy trinity of Command & Conquer, The Two Crafts, and Age of Empires. Relic has a tangled history, going through acquisitions by both THQ and Sega, losing the Homeworld rights to Gearbox in the transition, before finally re-emerging in 2024 as an independent studio, even if they had to lay off 40 of their employees to make the jump. By 2021, they were really the only major player left, with a small if capable kingdom of their own. Eurogamer reported as early as August of 2017 that a fourth Age of Empires was in development, handled not by the vanquished Ensemble, but by the still surviving Relic. Age of Empires 4 would release on October 28th of 2021. Unfortunately for us, the game opens in the worst way possible, hitting us with an accessibility screen, which is understandable, and a forced tutorial, which is not. Hey developers, stop doing this. I need to get into the graphics and other settings before you launch a thing. Don't be dumb. They do these forced tutorials because of online play, hearing complaints of people jumping into the game without knowing what they're doing. But it never works. You're just pandering to the lowest common denominator and annoying everyone else by doing it. Honestly, as far as tutorials go, this one isn't bad. I just don't like being held hostage while I play it. Villagers are back and once again drop things off, the better graphics and passage of time letting us actually see it placed into baskets. The artwork, writing, music, and voice acting are all great here. Houses spawn little gardens around them, roads appear around buildings, and when constructed, we get to see these architectural ghost projections hammering away, scaffolding rising and lowering as the building nears completion. We can hear the chopping of wood, the grinding of mills, and the hooves of horses galloping across fields of wild flowers. Gameplay has us back to building soldiers individually, and we can double-click a building to select all of the same type, like past games did with units, helping to churn replacement armies out faster. Buildings catch fire and take damage over time when low enough on health, forcing players to prioritize repairs, which we're back to doing manually. And finally, we advance by building one of two special buildings, again evoking Age of Mythology's gods and Three's governors, though this is closer to the latter. The buildings are usually the same as their normal counterpart, but with a slight bonus to this or that, rather than altering an entire playstyle. Because these buildings are constructed, assigning more villagers will make us age up faster. We Agincourt some French, and that's the tutorial. While the changes to Age of Empires 4's gameplay are slight when compared directly to Age of Empires 2, the impact on play is significant. So for this final game in this series, we're going to focus less on the individual campaigns, which aren't that good, we'll get there, and focus instead on gameplay, circling back to level design to see how all these changes bore out. We've returned to the structure of the Age of Kings, with stone as a resource, being able to build wherever we want, and having wide open maps. But the margins have all been adjusted to give the game a slower design with intentional decisions and strategies needed by the player. Unit production crawls, the batching ability from 3 long gone, requiring a player to give serious thought not only to the units they have on the field, but the units they have in production. In past Age games, players were always incentivized to build more than one barracks, as it meant you could make replacement troops far faster, but outside of the original game, it wasn't forced. Oftentimes, a new army was spitting out back at base even as the old army was dying in the field. In Age of Empires 4, that is simply not the case, at least until the endgame. Troops need to be queued up at pretty much all times if you hope to have replacements ready for an enemy assault, should your army be defeated on the open field. 2 fully stocked mills and 3 of each military building seems to be the economic and military sweet spot, compared to say 2 of the main buildings and 1 of each specialty buildings in past games. While this can make defense tricky, I think it is a clear improvement on the overall pace of the game. It forces a player to be proactive in their building, punishes them for not having a strong economy that can keep up with the demand, and rewards players for thinking about when and where to position their troops. The idea of deliberateness funnels down into how units are used. Soldiers are back to standing in formation, but their unit composition and position seems to matter a lot more now. In past games, you wouldn't build 1 group of rock, 1 of paper, and 1 of scissors to maneuver around and counter one another. You would build a big cluster of them all and throw it at the enemy, in what the genre affectionately calls a death ball. You could do that in Age of Empires 4, but it doesn't work nearly as well. Instead, the game wants you to keep your spearmen, archers, and cavalry separated like it's an Offspring song. With very little micro, we can send them against the unit they're supposed to be countering, leading to dynamic battles that look like they're using real medieval tactics if you squint hard enough. Time and again, we're able to pull off things that would have been possible in past games, but felt useless, like having cavalry skirt around a battle to hit archers from behind, having contingents of spearmen break off to block charging troops or protect archers, or being able to position our troops for devastating flanking maneuvers. It creates a system where attacks are well formed, where the enemy will leave little armies near gates or other areas they want to protect, resulting in the computer feeling smarter overall. It not only encourages us to deathball less, it rewards us for doing so. Though, if we're being honest, there is still a fair amount of jank here. The game has a constant problem where soldiers will run around the outside of a formation looking for someone to pair up with instead of actually doing damage. I suspect this is because the game treats an attack click and an attack move different when targeting a formation. Because attack move targets the first thing encountered, everyone pairs up as intended. But attack tells them not to kill the formation, but this one specific guy, causing them to dance around, determine they can't reach that guy, and then look for someone else to dance with. Regardless of the actual reason, it looks terrible and should have been fixed before this game shipped. The other issue here is the game defaults to attack on left click, even though it's used way less often than attack move, which requires 2 clicks or a hotkey and a click if you want to be pedantic. Honestly, they should have just made attack move the default here. And while I'm complaining, the stand ground stance unticks every single time you move a unit for some reason, making managing archers and defensive positions a real pain in the ass, just super fiddly in ways it doesn't need to be. And finally, there are these little Clippy style dynamic tutorials that pop up to help explain how to do things, which is a really good idea that was super annoying in practice, much like Clippy. They pop up too often, are too obvious, and take several instances of doing the action to get them to go away. Cool idea, could have used another polish pass. And then there are the traders. They're back to working like Age of Empires 2, unfortunately, although they thankfully added neutral trading sites, meaning traders actually have, a function. Even cooler, they drop the gold they're carrying when you kill them, directly incentivizing raids and forcing a player to protect them. Awesome all around. The problem is picking up treasure is done by a raycast. If you don't know what raycasting is, just think of it like an invisible line that is cast from one object, in this instance the mouse cursor, until it hits another object, like the chest. Click on chest, pick up chest, no problem, except when it's behind a tree, because then the raycast isn't hitting the chest, now it's hitting the tree. This is admittedly just a dumb programming thing. It's not hard to fix. You just prioritize the chest over the tree. But it is another case of I don't know why this wasn't fixed before the game was shipped, much less now so many months and years later. And finally, there's some weirdness to the AI that goes on with prioritization. The enemy will be smart enough to kill a villager trying to build a tower first, which is great, but your soldiers will be dumb enough to attack tents, which don't do anything, instead of the guys shooting them in the face. Or this instance on Mongol 3, in which some gold dropped on a bridge heavily guarded by towers. I knew that one of my soldiers would get cut down before being able to grab it. So being the heartless lich that I am, I sent 4 soldiers to get that job done. This isn't economically smart. The soldiers are more expensive than whatever I'm going to get from this chest, but I'm evil. What do I care? So my horseman and his 3 archers go. The horseman gets shot in his sacrificial face as expected, and then the archers just stop. It's like only the horseman got the command to retrieve the chest, and once he was dead, the rest of his platoon didn't know what to do. As if the archers weren't following my command, they were following the horseman's. I don't know why you would stack the AI that way, but there's something going on there under the hood that should be fixed. The Norman 3rd mission introduces us to walls, a system completely overhauled for Age of Empires 4. Wooden walls are still here and feel meaningful for slowing down troops or protecting stone walls from cannon shot in the later ages, far more so than in earlier games. Stone walls are physically much larger and wide enough for archers and infantry to stand atop them. Towers are built on the face of a wall and can only fire forward, meaning that once you breach the walls, you can bypass the other defenses, closer to actual medieval siege warfare. And infantry are more versatile, able to build rolling towers or rams that then function as their own unit, rather than having them centrally built by a workshop back at base. And it's always fun to see the ruins of gates and walls remain on the map, even when destroyed. One of the best things about Dawn of War were all the dead bodies. Unfortunately, as cool as the idea sounds, the developers completely undercut it by allowing infantry to burn down wall gates, no siege needed. And once I realized this, I never bothered with siege again. It just undermines their whole system, which honestly might be my biggest disappointment in this game. I love the idea of a proper wall system instead of the papier-mâché walls in Age of Kings. In past games, I never bothered building them because they're resource-intensive and crumble to dust if you look at them funny. Having real walls with troops placed atop them and specific counters that need to be employed directly reinforces the gameplay direction we've seen with unit tactics and troop manufacturing. A slower, more deliberate design. But because infantry can so easily burn their way through a gate, and you generally only need to breach a wall in one or two locations, I never had reason to actually build rams and towers, or bring siege equipment outside of the occasional long-range cannon. In practice, this results in the enemy having their army behind the gate rather than on the walls, both armies scrimmaging over the gate itself, ignoring the walls completely. Cannon are useful to open up flanking breaches, but that's about it. I don't know if they took this half measure out of fear of players' response, or felt they were treading too heavily on the series' legacy, but under the current system, walls are of far more limited use than they would otherwise be. While much of the campaign has us placing defenders atop walls to fend off waves of enemy attack, in skirmish I retreated to the familiar pattern of towers, castles, and troops, skipping walls altogether. Once again, I find myself wishing they had limited the siege units in this game to rams, boarding towers, and trebuchets, rather than an approach that tries to make everyone happy, resulting in a gameplay system that might as well not exist. I'd accuse them of not learning that lesson from Age of Empires 3, but this is an entirely different company. And while we're doing all our complaining, there's another thing in this game I really wanted to like that is just completely useless. You can tell the designers were proud of it because the campaign encourages us to do it multiple times, but the actual rules of their game means we never need to do it, and that's ambushing. It works like this. There's tall grass, and you can position your troops in there to hide them. Enemy walks by, archers do the archery thing, and it works like every stealth game ever. And that's a fun idea, but there are problems both conceptual and practical. Conceptually, how often is this going to come up? The maps are randomly generated, so we need grass to randomly spawn on a path that the enemy is likely to take. Then we have to deploy troops there and wait for the enemy to happen by, all in the hopes of getting the drop on them. Like, how often does that actually happen? I actually ran into this exact same problem when designing Wintermoor, thanks to that game's backgrounds, which are supposed to grant players really powerful abilities. But there were backgrounds whose abilities were things like detecting secret passages, or never getting lost when outdoors, or automatically succeeding at pickpocketing. But like, how often is that going to come up? It's great in that one instance, and the rest of the time is useless. I solved that problem in Wintermoor, by the way, by just layering bad abilities on top of one another. So you get 3 things that will maybe come up instead of 1, which almost never will. It's not a great solution, but hey, I'm not a professional game designer. Back to Age of Empires, the game we're actually talking about, the ambush mechanic here is even worse, and that there's no mechanical benefit for doing it, even when the stars do align. Putting units in these little stealth forests will make them really hard to see, but it doesn't give them any bonus to attack or range. So according to this game's own tutorialization, we get some archers, put them in the grass, wait for just the right moment to attack, and it's just like every other encounter in the game. Sure, we might get one volley of surprise, but the units aren't doing enough damage to make that really matter. The enemy then just turns and attacks us anyway. It's a cool idea, and a tactic that has been used to devastating effect in the real world. Greetings from Teutoburg Forest. But its implementation in this game feels only halfway there, succeeding it by putting it in the game, but giving it no real benefit or advantage for actually using it. How hard is it to give me a plus 15% to range or damage when attacking from the woods or whatever? Overpowered, maybe, but only in the rare limited instance that the ambush actually works. As is, there's no reason wasting the time or cognitive load to pull it off. The campaigns of Age of Empires 4 forgo any real narrative structure, instead focusing on, well, actual history. In place of following a singular character or military campaign, each story focuses on a nation over a period of time, often centuries, conveyed through brief documentaries shot in a style familiar to the Old History Channel or the BBC. And this, like so many things in Age of Empires 4, is a mixed bag. On the one hand, as a fan of history and as someone who misses these older style of documentaries, I think this stuff is really great. Sure, the Bayeux Tapestry is pretty surface level when talking about England, and anyone who studies this period of history likely already knows about Gedalon Castle. But the White Ship disaster is a proper deep cut. It's a great story, which I won't recount here, but if you're interested in that period of history, I recommend The Plantagenets by Dan Jones. It's a pretty fun read without being too heavy on the textbook stuff. And hey, while you're buying his book, maybe pick up one of mine. I'm going to end up being more successful in selling other people's books than my own. The Norman campaign is pretty solid overall. The maps across both Norman 2 and 3 are a breath of fresh air compared to cramped levels of the past couple games. Norman 2 is littered with lovely little touches like treasure at campsites, roads around the walls, and wolves waiting in the woods. The enemy even having a special squadron to guard the back gates. The designers hemming in the map with this river and broken bridge, making the map feel far larger than it is. These are all things we've seen in past games, but are combined here by Relic in masterful fashion. Norman 3 is expansive and feels lived in thanks to little farms and forest camps scattered about, rather than everything always being clustered around the enemy town center. Much of the map is still banded in by forest, defining the play space, but is well designed and never feels too claustrophobic, even giving York distinct areas and districts. The sound design plays an equal part, something Relic has often succeeded in. It's very pleasant with the chopping of the wood and the calming soundtrack, but also in how little it hammers you. Alarms, when they happen, are brief and backed by diegetic town bells, rather than a constant string of loud artificial pings. Although I have to say I found the soundtrack pretty forgettable. It's not bad, it just feels derivative of a lot of stuff in the rest of the industry and lacks the identity that made Rippy's soundtrack so timeless. The first Norman mission is in this new big battle style, which replaces the walking missions of yore. It's weird, a little chaotic, but fun. Norman 5 is a map which rules because there's a werewolf labeled as Bitey Infantry, and is a map which sucks because I pull off this awesome plan to assassinate the enemy king, only for the game to protect him with plot armor. Norman 8 is pretty good. It's another defense mission, and as a side note, there are just way too many defense missions in this game. It's like half the total missions. But Norman 8 uses the type well. It's a dual camp mission of a castle we have to hold. It's got the food and stone, and a second camp with a market with some wood. The mission alternates between a siege phase in which we have to fend off attacks, and an ambush phase in which we explore with our band of merry men, intercepting enemy siege units, gathering new recruits, and building trade caravans. This gives us time to repair repair our defenses and rebuild our forces before the next assault. It's even set on a night map, with dawn coming with the final assault, showing off the game's day-night cycle, with troops having less visibility in the dark. All very cool. Norman 8 could have been a disaster, a strange hybrid of walking mission and defense, but Age of Empires 4 combines these mission types in a way that leverages all of their strengths and none of their weaknesses. For starters, the enemy attacks on the castle are never too punishing, so long as you intercept the siege. Second, our new camp never comes under attack, so we don't have to pay too much attention to it outside its economic benefits. And third, the monotony of the attack and defense cycle is augmented by the vignettes of our merry band. There's a camp of brigands we can recruit, a group of Englishmen we can rescue, a detachment of reinforcements arriving late to the party. It all ends up playing very smoothly while maintaining a challenge and subtly tutorializing markets, trade routes, and hit-and-run tactics. All in all, a really smart, well-executed package. Norman 9 is a fun map with sacred sites to fight over, just so very many sheep, and optional objectives that, when completed, cause enemy defenders to abandon the fight. The enemy also flanked me through the woods, which I am firmly impressed with. The enemy AI in these games gets so predictable along such obvious routes that it can almost feel like tower defense. Exposing flanks like this makes me feel like I'm fighting a real, if imaginary, opponent. And finally, Norman 10 is, say it with me, another defense mission, but one that comes dangerously close to being a puzzle, in that it has a right and wrong solution. There's relics scattered about the map, treasure in the enemy base, and even a bit of stone, but much of the map is expansive and empty. Could have used like a sacred site out here or some more treasure to reward those who take the time to explore. Still pretty. I also love this little village outside the walls, with civilians who flee as we leave, and the odd house or farmer just chilling about the map. All of it adds to a sense of realism. The Rus campaign focuses on Moscow, and has us returning to the city over many decades, seeing it grow and evolve as we fend off and eventually fight back against the Mongols. The history here is basic, but at least it's a topic most people don't bother to study. It's a strong opening, with our village burning as we drive off a raid already in progress. More importantly, the Rus play a bit different. Not enough to make this a true asymmetric RTS like StarCraft, but reminiscent of the differences in mythology. Like the Egyptians before them, the Rus are all about gold, earned not by mining, but through hunting. Instead of mills, we get hunting lodges, which must be placed near forests, earning a passive trickle of gold from nearby trees. Additionally, we get a bounty each time we hunt an animal, even sheep, and the more bounties we get, the better the rate from our hunting lodges. The trade-off here is pretty obvious. We don't gather food as fast thanks to no mills, but we gather gold a lot easier, especially if trade routes are difficult or non-existent. Instead of having to defend lines of carts, we have to defend our hunting lodges. Unfortunately, the UI seems bugged, not telling us how much gold we'll earn until after building the lodge, even though it looks like it wants to. The bigger problem is that the Rus feel like they're trying to make hunting more relevant, instead of using hunting to make the Rus more interesting. Hunting is rarely used in Age of Empires outside the early game. It's a tricky part of game design and one we often run into. Hell, I ran into it in Wintermore. The idea is that you have these different areas of play and you want factions that focus on or enhance them. So this faction is better at defense, this faction is better at naval stuff, and so on. But the danger here is that by tying a faction to a not great mechanic like hunting, you risk ending up with a faction that isn't that interesting to play as. An Age of Empires player who really likes hunting is going to see the Rus as a no-brainer. But if you don't care about hunting, which I suspect is true of most players, why would you ever pick this faction? The hunting lodges could be the answer, being a great source of gold, but only on a heavily wooded map. Like ambushes, we're back to the problem of something being overly situational and not likely to happen all that often. Rust 2 brings back the tribute mission from Age of Kings, and Mission 3 is another big battle in which we have to defend a river crossing. I like these big battle maps more than walking missions, and they do emphasize the better unit tactics in Age of Empires 4, but they still feel like I'm playing with one hand behind my back and are awfully reliant on scripting, limiting replayability and experimentation. Rus 5 has us off to Novigrad, not to be confused with Novigrad, which I'm just learning are different cities. It's overall one of the better Rus missions, letting us take objectives at our own pace, with periodic attacks to keep us awake. It provides room to experiment with the new faction, without feeling like our hands are being held. 6 is another defense mission with a King of the Hill style mechanic, in which we need to maintain a superior force along some river crossings. Once we hold for 15 minutes, we can then break out and attack the enemy, something a lot of these defense missions do in 4. And I like that. It offers a bit of mechanical and narrative catharsis after a long mission of holding, rather than cutting off at the countdown of some arbitrary timer. However, this mission does reveal another weakness in the Rus faction, and it has to do with their special unit, Musketeers. They're a powerful unit with a good look, but we're only able to build them once we've gotten to the 4th Age, constructed a university, and researched gunpowder. They then need 2 additional upgrades to get fully powered up. It represents a significant investment for a unit that's only going to come into play at the end of the match, compared to, say, longbowmen, which are just always useful. And Rus 8 is the only time across all 4 campaigns that boats show up, dropping off a delivery, and it's a pretty good mission overall. The Rus campaign is solid if a bit reliant on defense missions and the idea of returning repeatedly to Moscow, but it's cute to see the city evolve over the ages, going from backwoods outpost to imperial capital. No, it's the 100 Years' War where things start to go off the rails. It's a really fascinating period of history. There's a reason why people have been writing about it, and its sequel, The War of the Roses, for the past 400 years. But the history told in Age of Empires 4 is very basic. Hell, they mention the English longbow as much as French history in this campaign, and it's the French campaign. It ends up feeling like a bingo card stamped without enthusiasm, failing to capture what's interesting about this period. This first mission is also not great, being one of the weirdest missions in the entire game. It's another quest mission to enact the Battle of 30 Champions. We wander around, trigger various vignettes to recruit champions, and then select 3 of those champions and their men to enter a tournament alongside us. It's cute. It does, in theory, provide a change of pace while leaning into the ideas of chivalry and paladins and all that, but mechanically, none of this works. One of the vignettes is a one-on-one duel on a bridge in a game in which units auto-attack and have fixed stats. Even the mock battle at the end only serves to highlight weaknesses in their grouping AI. And sure, it looks cool. I love this little touch of all the villagers heading to the tournament over the course of the match, even the tourney ground themselves, but then none of the gameplay serves the game it's in. Maybe I'm just jaded and old, and you could argue that if all I wanted was another conquest map, I could play Skirmish, but everything in development is a trade-off. A lot of work went into this mission, from custom scripting to art assets, but I wish it were in service of something that was actually fun to play, instead of time and effort spent on another gimmick level, with little replayability and which will quickly fade from memory that could have gone elsewhere, say the roughly 20 or so defense missions. France 2 is another one that is fun conceptually, but bungles the execution. It's another defense mission, but one that thankfully we won't lose unless all our landmarks are burned, providing a fun opportunity for defense and depth. My walls get breached and I prepare for a desperate last stand on this little island, only for the game to decide I won when I wasn't looking. This map makes this big show of having all these troops outside the walls to show how dangerous the situation is. But the end result is a minimap that is too cluttered to be useful, and the feeling that I only won because the computer let me. It doesn't help that Norman 7 is a better version of the same concept. Mission 3 gives us the two unique French units, which also perplex me. One is an archer, which just feels like it overlaps with a longbowman. I mean, I get that one's an archer and the other a crossbowman, but like, two archers, come on. The other is a royal knight, which is fine, I just don't know why they didn't call them cavaliers, since they went so far to remind us about chivalry with the tournament battle. Apparently, the British have a different relationship with that word, or they could have gone with paladins, seeing as the French invented them, but maybe that would confuse all the fantasy fans. Nitpicking names aside, the mission's fine. France 4 is awful, clearly one of the worst in the game and wasn't tested enough. We have to defend Pont-Vallon for 16 minutes. The surrounding countryside filled with farms we're supposed to save, but which really serve as a progression tracker for the advancing army. We start with no gold, instead relying on trade caravans. The wrinkle being that it costs gold to make more trade caravans, meaning our economy is going to crawl forward. Because we're short on gold, we can only afford spearmen and archers, which can't punch through the enemy's heavy armor. Armor-piercing units cost gold. Economic upgrades to get more gold costs gold. Aging up costs gold. Buying siege units cost gold. And to top it all off, the game won't let us build towers or walls just because they said so. Maybe I'm a bad player or a bad person, but I don't get what about this level is supposed to be enjoyable. The challenge is entirely artificial, built around an economic bottleneck, feeling like a puzzle that only makes sense to the person who made it. I made several attempts at this one trying to get the economic balance just right before giving it up, making it the only mission in 4 that I skipped. France 5 is fine, in which we have to defend Orléans while attacking a castle across a river, and France 6 is another disaster of a level I'm going to pick on because it makes a good lesson in level design. We fill another spot on our bingo card by bringing in Joan of Arc, who has to get to Reims. We get an army, walk through the woods, and get a bunch of tutorialization. We don't need this far into the game. Finding treasure allows us to buy reinforcements, and we link up with Joan to get our next objective. There are 3 paths to town, each with an enemy regiment headed down it. We can either stop the advancing armies, or race to the town and build it up before they arrive. They're trying to offer us choice, not just in fighting or defending, but in seeing how much we can take on. Maybe we take out the first regiment and then retreat, or risk our army by taking out 2, racing to rebuild before the 3rd arrives. But our army is so large that none of that ever comes into play. We just crush each enemy in turn and the mission is over. Even the layout offers us no choice because the regiments are laid out in turn. There's nothing to do but attack them in order. It plays like a bad tutorial level 6 missions into the French campaign. It ends up being not just half-baked filler, but bad filler. I would have preferred another straight-up skirmish level to this, as at least then I would have been able to tackle the level in the way I wanted. It feels like they started with the idea of, we have to have a mission to escort the Dauphin to Reims, and then didn't do anything interesting with it. A first draft they meant to come back to, and never did. France 7 continues this trend of things that weren't well thought out enough, this time not in layout or mission, but in units. The mission structure is fine. Build cannon, smash enemy, good time all around. The problem is with the cannons, of which the game makes a big deal about giving us 2 new ones. The flute gun, which everyone can get, and the generically named cannon, which is unique to the French. The flute gun is good for chewing through formations, but so are most things, and the cannon's big difference is that it can shoot without having to set up first. But it's so weak and normal guns set up so fast that I don't see a point in building it. They're just categorically outclassed by their normal counterpart. On the positive side, this mission was at least a lot of fun to play. The computer made some really strong attacks on my flanks, especially if I pulled back on one of the lanes, making it feel like I was playing against a real opponent instead of some story scripting. And then France 8 is just another far too scripted match that isn't actually fun to play. Less like playing with toy soldiers, and more like someone else telling you how to play with them. Finally, there are the Mongols, where this style of storytelling completely fell apart for me, losing any sense of narrative cohesion. The English, Rus, and French campaigns each follow a singular thrust, a narrative through their nation's history. The Normans conquering England, the Rus fighting off the Mongols, the French becoming a nation through a century of war. More importantly, they're told sequentially, the French campaign coming after the English, following a linear progression in time. But the Mongol campaign has us going back to the past, back to when they were conquering the Rus. The narration even asks if the Mongols have finally met their match, as though it's some dramatic question, but we already know the answer because we were that match 2 campaigns ago. Their second mission then takes us yet another 10 years further into the past, with a fight against China and a very long tutorialization of scouts. Maybe they did it because the Mongols are harder to play, but it feels like the Mongols and the Rus should have been reversed. So I guess we should talk about how they actually play, as they're quite different from the others. The big feature, I'll stop using the word gimmick, is that the Mongols are nomadic, able to pick up their buildings and relocate like the Terrans in StarCraft. We get a special unit that can shoot and move at the same time, a scout with a flying hawk that acts like the hot air balloon from 3, and a hero unit that gets stronger with each age. We earn resources from burning enemy buildings, and we get the Uvu, a special building which will mine stone deposits for us automatically, and provide benefits to nearby buildings. Now I'm going to unbury the lead here and tell you I don't like anything about how the Mongols are designed, but I want to point out my obvious bias in that opinion before we get into specifics. I like turtling and don't like micro, so the Mongols were never going to be my favorite. I was already predisposed to not liking them, but I still think their core design doesn't really work. So let's talk about why. First, getting resources by burning and destroying enemy structures. This is actually pretty smart, directly incentivizing us to raid. Love this, no notes here. The Uvus, however, are interesting in concept, but fall apart in execution. Here's the design challenge they're trying to solve. The Mongols are mobile, and therefore, stone is useless to them. There's no point in a nomadic civilization building massive stone walls. So as a player, I'm not going to waste time mining it, and even if I did, I'd have nothing to spend it on. So how do we solve that? The designers attempted to solve it with 3 changes. First, it's mined automatically. You don't have to waste villagers on it. Second, buildings placed near an Uvu are better able to do things. This comes at a cost, but we pay for that cost in the stone we don't need. This all sounds fine, but I don't think the benefits are really worth it. Building 2 villagers for 1 at an added cost of 200 stone, or plus 5% to farming, like who cares? This is the RPG equivalent of giving me plus 2% to melee damage as an upgrade. It's boring, it's not really noticeable, it doesn't feel good, bad design. And then we get to their most prominent feature, the moving buildings thing. The idea here is that we can put buildings next to our Uvu, and then when the Uvu is exhausted, we can pack everything up and move on to the next Uvu, nomad style. And my playstyle be damned, just nothing about this mechanic is a good idea, and it might be a little complicated to explain why. So as we've learned now over these 5 games, Age of Empires is about economics. Every second of a match, your resources are gathering, your buildings are producing, while your enemy is doing the same. Pauses in these things are bad, as it means you're going to fall behind. If I pick up a building and move it, that building stops working. No resources are gathering, no soldiers are training, everything just stops while I move on yonder. Why would I ever intentionally do that? Even more damning, new buildings aren't that expensive outside of the early game. By the time I need a new town, I can just build one at the new location, while maintaining my existing base with no economic drawback. You know, like every other civilization in this game. I think the fantasy is this Hail Mary Pro League StarCraft gambit of moving your base to some corner of the map to hide from your enemy instead of getting wiped out. But like, how often does that happen in a kitchen table game? And when it happens, how likely is it that it will work? Even in a team match in which it's common to flee to your neighbor's base, if yours is overrun, it doesn't really work long term because you end up cannibalizing each other's resources. It feels like the designers started with the assumption that they have to have the Mongols because the Mongols were in 2, and then asked themselves, what's cool about the Mongols? They're nomads, and they raid. And that's as far as they got. They generated some cool ideas, like not having to build houses, or pastures that slowly generate sheep. Getting resources by raiding is great, but the whole Uvu mobile thing just doesn't work within the game they've built. Honestly, I think they should have leaned more into the mobile approach. Make the sheep generator not a building, but a unit that is always mobile. Ditch stone altogether, have me focus purely on moving and raiding, with as few buildings as possible. Hell, bring back the bounty mechanic from the Rus, having my bonuses from raiding get stronger the more I do it. In the end, this feels like another half measure that didn't go far enough and ended up too weak because of it. Designers, make bold choices. Give your players cool shit. Stop undermining things in the hope of having this perfectly balanced idea of a game. You just end up with rounded blobs that aren't exciting. I know it can be hard when having a multiplayer game, you want it to be balanced. But the thing you learn as a designer, especially the more you playtest, is that people bitch about balance far more than the problem actually exists. You will see players who will swear up and down such and such is the one correct answer, the only option or true path, meaning the game is broken and busted, only for them to get wrecked in a real match. Balance is important, but not at the expense of something that is bland or uninteresting to actually play. As for the missions themselves, they're mostly bad for all the reasons we've already discussed, so I won't belabor it. But I want to pick on Mission 8 because it does a thing designers keep doing, which annoys me. It's a dual camp mission in which if X number of enemies reach the goalpost, we lose, like we saw in Age of Empires 3. That's all fine. Our first objective is to build walls to close off the mountain pass, and that's fine. The problem is that completing this wall is the trigger for the enemy assault, and that's not fine. There's two outcomes here. Outcome 1, an inexperienced player goes about the mission, builds the wall, and then is surprised when a flood of enemies come pouring down, not realizing it was a trigger because they don't know what those are. Outcome 2, a player like me starts playing, has patented gamer intuition in which they see exactly how this kind of match is going to work, and then they just never build the wall. The game is directly incentivizing us, once we know the trick, to do everything but the stated objective. The best way to play this mission is not to engage with it, treating it like a city builder as we max out our age, research every technology, build a max population army, and as many towers as will fit, only triggering the assault once maximally prepared. Clearly, that is not the intent of this mission, but players are always going to optimize the fun out of everything. And if, for some reason, you want to do it this way, rather than relying on, say, an arbitrary timer, then make it clear to the player. Have them know when they're triggering the assault. And so I'm saying at least one nice thing in this campaign. The last mission is pretty fun, in which we have to crack an uncrackable city. It gives us the problem and the tools to solve it, but lets us do it on our own. A decent enough note to end an otherwise struggling campaign. For the other games in this retrospective, I didn't spend time talking about Skirmish because I've played dozens if not hundreds of hours of each of them. outside of the original Age of Empires. For Age of Empires 4, however, I only had about a dozen hours of playtime before starting this video, and wanted to kick the tires a bit before wrapping things up. Plus, I wanted to try naval combat, seeing as it wasn't in the campaign, which it could have used, instead of another dozen defense missions. The menu shows us a bunch of civs and civ variants we don't actually have because we haven't purchased the DLC, which is a little gross. What's more gross is that in the actual match, we see that mercenaries can be purchased if you are playing the Byzantines, which I both don't own and aren't in this match. It's an ad for a DLC within the game being played, and seriously guys, what the fuck? The civs have a difficulty indicator, which I also stole from Cosmic Encounter for Wintermoor, and each civ has a unique twist to help them stand out from the others, like the Mongols not needing houses, or the Ottomans' military academies, which continually produce units. One odd thing here is more than one civ have a trade-off where you harvest berries faster but can't hunt boar, which sounds plausible, but how many players actually hunt boar? You have berries and sheep to last you until farms, and deer are easier to hunt. Boar only ever struck me as an option of last resort, but maybe I'm not pro-strats enough. I go with the Holy Roman Empire because they're defense and infantry focused, and get a cool monk that boosts production like the Pharaoh of yore. Unfortunately, this monk can't actually pick up relics or grab sacred sites until the Third Age because I guess that would be too broken, but feels really arbitrary. Again, just give your players cool stuff, stop being cowards. I go with Regicide for old time's sake as it was my favorite mode in 2, and a water map so we can finally see boats. No hero units, which is sad, and I never once felt the need to build walls, which proves how the concept doesn't really work in real matches because of how the designers undercut the system. The naval gameplay is also a step back in my opinion, returning closer to Age of Empires 2. It's more manageable than 2, keeping the broadsides and ship repair of 3. A step in the right direction, just one I again wish they had made bolder. For the second skirmish, I go England and Black Forest, 8-player free-for-all, classic. The English Abbey of Kings lets me turn one of my knights into a hero king unit, which is cool, and I kinda like the idea of each faction having their own spin on a hero unit, from the Holy Roman monk to the Mongol Khan to the English king. It's a nice half step between old Age of Empires and say Warcraft 3, but unfortunately there's only a handful of factions that actually get them. Again, I felt no need to build walls as they take too many resources and crumble too easily, instead building nested towers and a wall of overlapping castles. I attack one neighbor and get caught off guard by yellow, because I wouldn't know this until later, but yellow only had one path out and it was through me. And this was where I started running into trouble with the sound design, particularly for the English. They ring the alarm bell when any enemy comes into range, even scouts, which happens so often you are constantly subjected to the sound effect and learn to ignore it. That and the cramped minimap means I never really paid attention to the opening onslaught and only saw the enemy when it's too late. Overall, I think some of these alarm barks could have been scaled back, making them clearer and more useful per sound. Good idea, the diegetic bell being better than a generic klaxing, but it needs tweaking. Later in the match, Magenta hit me with a devastating attack with superior unit composition and broke through my defenses, and could have knocked me out of the game, but pulled back for some reason. Maybe the enemy chickened out because of my defense and depth. Maybe they got attacked by another player when I wasn't looking, but it felt less like divine providence and more like the computer letting me win, which doesn't feel great. Then I fell into the classic deathball stalemate, changes to the gameplay be damned. The trick here, aside from a rocking economy and max upgrades, was to completely fill all of my production queues. The English unique ability lets castles make troops, so I could set up a system where whenever a unit died, another one was instantly created, recreating Age of Kings design, so that when one deathball burned out, another was ready to go. Which I think ultimately is the price paid for having so many ideas that pushed things forward, but only a half step, ending up in all too familiar ground. Let's talk about that a bit more. in the wrap-up. Age of Empires 4 is, in some ways, the best game this series has ever made. 2 is obviously the more historically important, but if we're talking about raw gameplay, I think Age of Empires 4 plays better. The towns are easier to manage, the micro isn't as frustrating, the unit tactics and economic pacing making the game feel slower and more deliberate rather than a frenetic clickfest of who can micro faster. It's a downright gorgeous game, and while some of that comes down to the advance in graphics, I love so many of the little touches on these maps. The way clouds can be seen going overhead, the day-night cycle, which is not only really pretty, it affects unit line of sight. The little wildflowers in the fields, the chopping of wood, the farmsteads spread out over the land, the pretty rivers and bridges, the really solid unit barks. I find myself just walking around my house going, "If we build it for they," when doing the dishes. Aside from the underwhelming soundtrack, this might be the best overall presentation I've seen in the genre. The biggest criticism of Age of Empires 4, and the one that is hardest to level, is that the game doesn't lean hard enough into the ideas it has. In a lot of ways, I sympathize with Relic because it's a real damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. I mean, look at 343 and Bungie, of Halo's rise and fall alongside Age of Empires. If you hew too close to Age of Empires 2, people will accuse you of making a lazy clone, or of abandoning the fans of mythology in Age of Empires 3, all 12 of them. And if you do something too different, like say bring in the capture point mechanic from Company of Heroes, you get accused of not living up to the franchise, of betraying the trust vested in a new steward of a beloved property. Even if you square the circle exactly, making a true sequel to the Age of Kings, well, that genre died for good reason. I mean, hell, if all people wanted was a shinier Age of Empires 2, they've had that at least 3 times now. We're allowed to make new games. I think a lot of the ideas were good here. Real walls you could place units on, heavier naval combat that has weight to it, civs that lean asymmetric to set them apart without having to reduce scope onto a limited number of extremely different factions. Slower build times and real unit formations that employ actual medieval tactics with hard counters, limiting the absolute bullshit that is siege units in this franchise. But all of those decisions are pulled back by fear or inexperience into systems that just don't work. Ambushing is useless. Walls are easily subverted by infantry burning gates. Flute guns replicate the problems of catapults cutting through formations. Abilities that still need to be microed when there's enough to manage in this game as is. Much of 4 feels like it's lacking a confidence the genre desperately needed. Take this exact game they've built with just a few minor changes, and I think they have an all-timer of an RTS on their hands. Have units be made in batches, like 3, and controlled in blocks, like Total War. It makes unit tactics clear, eliminates the problem of death balls, and gets rid of their AI jank. Completely eliminate infantry's ability to burn gates, and get rid of every siege unit that isn't a ram, a rolling tower, or a trebuchet. Maybe one cannon as a civ special unit. Now walls matter. Sieges matter. Tactics and defense and positions and control of resources all matter. Make naval combat slower and hit harder, leaning further down the road that Age of Empires 3 started. Now it feels like a unique form of gameplay, one people have reason to engage with and might actually enjoy playing naval maps, so you don't have to keep copy and pasting defense missions in your campaign. Age of Empires 4 is really good. It might be my favorite in the series, but you can feel its own limitations holding it back. I hope with the next entry, if there is a next entry, Relic uses this as a starting point for a deeper exploration, journeying farther into the defense horizon, rather than sticking so close to a familiar shore. Age of Empires is a fascinating franchise, both in its own history and in the history of the industry swirling around it. A series that arose when video games were still new, when an entire genre was coming into being, when small teams could still make games in just a couple years, and in which dozens of designers were eager to enter and experiment within the space. While its meteoric success led to the company getting acquired and another company splitting off to find success of its own, it struggled with a modernizing, faster-paced world. The genre they helped form changed under their very feet, pushed into a faster, leaner style by one of their rivals. The move to 3D resulted in smaller maps and more predictable lanes, two design currents that would ultimately get swept up into a new genre of their own with the MOBA. Age of Empires, which brought so many people into this genre, suddenly found itself with a dwindling audience, and a reduction in market share as a flood of similar RTSs filled the space, with an owner that was once so eager to buy companies only to divest of them soon after, a trend which this very same company has repeated this very same year. Game development never changes. Age of Empires and the ensemble that built it shattered into successor kingdoms with mixed histories of their own, rushing off to mobile gold mines and tech acquisitions, only to then fall apart themselves. And then there's Relic, quietly running alongside us this entire story, only to pick up the banner when there was no one left to carry it. A company which has desperately struggled to maintain the quality and acceptance of their own franchises, who has been bought and sold and escaped into freedom, only for us to wonder how long they too will be around. Given the layoffs at Microsoft, the struggles Age of Empires 4 has had to maintain an online community, and the overall contracting of both the economy and game development, I would not be surprised if this is the last we hear about this franchise for a long time, outside of updates to older games and the occasional DLC. We're left to wonder, what is the age of a genre, of a company? I don't know. But I do know it's measured in decades, not centuries, and low numbers at that. The end of a genre, the end of an era, the end of an empire. I'm Michael Aguero. Thanks for watching. Hey, it's time for the depressing ad break. The script for this video is over 35,000 words, and the video itself took hundreds of hours to make. I do all of that for free. Ad revenue for this video is going to make me around $300 if I'm lucky, or less than $1 an hour. While some folks are kind enough to leave a tip through Super Thanks, and there's 2 people supporting the Patreon, the main hope with this channel was that it would help sell my books and games. But it doesn't do that. The Sims video moved maybe 40 copies, which was cool, don't get me wrong, but that translates to about $80. Look, I know times are tough, and I don't want anyone to give something they can't afford, but we've reached a point with this channel where I just don't know why I'm doing it anymore. I enjoy it, of course I enjoy it, and a lot of this is research I wanted to do myself. But given the overall state of the economy and the generally collapsing world we live in, there just isn't a lot of point in this. The good news is that I'm writing another book, one which is almost done, and I will be making at least one more video so I can promote it. It's another video in which it was research I was going to do anyway, so I might as well bring you along for the ride. It's a video game retrospective, but I'm going to warn you all up front, the format is going to be a little different. At the end of the day, this channel needs to grow, or at the very least, sustain itself. For a long time, that was being done by the Sims video, which helped new people find the channel, but the algorithm has finally lost interest in it, meaning we're just kind of floating along here. So tell a friend, watch some other videos, buy a book or 3, and maybe we'll all keep getting to do this thing. Thanks for watching, and at least one more time, I'll see you in the next video.